My name is Whitney. I am 34 years old, and for the entire month leading up to Labor Day weekend, my mother kept telling me not to make any plans. Just wait, she would say, with a secretive smile. I have a surprise for you. The morning of the holiday, I woke up in an empty house. By noon, I was staring at my sister's social media story, showing my entire family clinking champagne glasses on a first-class flight to Aspen. The caption read, "Best trip ever, when the dark cloud is not around to ruin the vibe." I did not cry or react. I simply sat at my computer and made one phone call. 3 days later, my phone screen was frozen with 77 missed calls and a frantic message from my mother begging, "Please let us back into the house." We had no idea. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who took your generosity for granted. The morning sun streaming through the blinds of my bedroom in Denver, Colorado, was bright and uncharacteristically warm for early September. It was Saturday, the beginning of the long Labor Day weekend. For the past 6 weeks, my mother Susan had been dropping heavy hints about this exact morning. She had told me repeatedly to clear my schedule, promising a massive family breakfast followed by a surprise that would make up for all the tense holidays we had endured over the past few years. "Do not book any flights, Whitney," she had insisted during one of our Sunday dinners. "We are doing something special as a family, just the 5 of us. I want everyone together." I had foolishly allowed myself to believe her. Despite a lifetime of being pushed aside in favor of my younger sister Brittany, a small, stubborn part of my heart still hoped that my parents genuinely wanted to spend quality time with me. I had even requested Friday off from my firm, where I worked demanding hours as a senior financial data auditor, just to make sure I was completely available for whatever grand plans my mother had orchestrated. As I stretched and pushed the heavy duvet off my legs, I expected to hear the familiar sounds of a busy household. My parents lived with me. They had moved into my 4-bedroom house 3 years ago, after my father Richard made some poor investment choices that nearly left them bankrupt. I had stepped in quietly, taking over their debts and giving them the master suite on the ground floor. Brittany and her husband Kevin lived in a trendy downtown loft, but they practically lived at my house on the weekends, treating my pantry like their personal grocery store and my backyard like their private country club. Usually, a Saturday morning meant the loud hum of the television, broadcasting my father's sports shows, the clatter of pans as my mother cooked, and the shrill sound of Brittany complaining about something Kevin had or had not done. But today there was nothing. The house was wrapped in a thick, suffocating silence. I grabbed my robe and walked down the hallway, the hardwood floors cold against my bare feet. I paused at the top of the stairs, listening closely. Not a single sound echoed from the lower level. No smell of brewing coffee. No scent of bacon sizzling in a pan. The air felt stale, as if the house had been empty for hours. A strange knot formed in my stomach as I descended the stairs. I called out my mother's name, expecting her to emerge from the laundry room or the garage, but my voice just bounced off the walls of the quiet living room. I walked into the kitchen, my eyes scanning the pristine countertops. The coffee maker was completely dry and unplugged. The sink was spotless. That was when I saw it. A small neon yellow sticky note pressed haphazardly against the stainless steel door of the refrigerator. I approached it slowly, the knot in my stomach tightening into a hard ball of dread. The handwriting belonged to my mother, characterized by her looping, hurried letters. It read, "Dad and I had to leave early. Brittany and Kevin had a sudden emergency and we needed to go help them figure things out. Do not wait up for us. Fix yourself some lunch. We will call you later." I stood there, staring at the piece of paper for a long time. An emergency. The word tasted sour in my mind. In my family, an emergency involving Brittany usually meant she had found a designer handbag on sale and needed someone to rush over to validate the purchase. Or Kevin had gotten into a minor disagreement with a barista and needed my parents to soothe his fragile ego. Brittany was 30 years old, but my parents still treated her like a helpless toddler whose every whim required an immediate, full-scale family response. Kevin was no better. He was a smooth-talking guy who constantly bragged about his tech startups, none of which ever seemed to generate actual revenue. Yet my parents fawned over him, treating him like a visionary genius. Whenever I asked practical questions about his business models, questions born from my decade of experience auditing financial data, I was immediately branded as jealous and unsupportive. "You are such a dark cloud, Whitney," my sister would sneer. "You just cannot stand seeing anyone else dream big because you are stuck in a boring cubicle looking at spreadsheets all day." I pulled the sticky note off the refrigerator, the adhesive making a tiny ripping sound in the quiet kitchen. The familiar wave of disappointment washed over me, heavy and exhausting. Once again, I had been cast aside the moment Brittany required attention. My mother had spent a month building up my expectations for a family weekend, only to abandon those plans without a second thought, without even a proper phone call. A sticky note on the fridge was all I warranted. I tossed the note into the trash can and turned to the window overlooking the driveway. My father's SUV was gone. I walked to the hallway and opened the door leading to the garage. My mother's sedan was gone as well. The garage felt vast and hollow. I went back into the kitchen to make myself a cup of coffee. As I waited for the machine to brew, the initial sting of rejection began to recede, replaced by the cool, analytical mindset that made me exceptional at my job. I was a financial auditor. My entire career was built on noticing discrepancies, finding the gaps in a story, and following the data until the truth revealed itself. And right now, the data in my own house was not adding up. If it was truly a sudden emergency, they would have rushed out in a panic. But the kitchen was too clean. The coffee maker had been unplugged, something my mother only did when she knew she would be away for an extended period. I walked down the hall to the ground floor master suite and pushed the door open. The bed was perfectly made. The closet doors were slightly ajar. I stepped inside and noticed that my father's large rolling suitcase was missing from the top shelf. My mother's matching travel bag was also gone. Her collection of expensive skincare products, which usually cluttered the bathroom vanity, had been completely cleared out. People rushing to a sudden emergency across town do not pack matching rolling suitcases and their entire daily skincare routines. They were not dealing with a crisis. They had packed for a trip. A planned extended trip. I walked slowly back to the kitchen, my coffee now forgotten. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture that was far more malicious than simple thoughtlessness. The weeks of telling me not to make plans, the insistence on keeping my schedule entirely clear, the promise of a family surprise, it was not a gesture of love. It was a calculated maneuver to ensure I stayed home, waiting dutifully in an empty house while they went somewhere else. I sat down at the kitchen island, my hands resting flat against the cool marble surface. I did not shed a tear. I had cried enough over these people in my 20s. I had spent years analyzing my own behavior, wondering what was wrong with me, wondering why I was never quite lovable enough to be chosen over my sister. I had paid their debts, provided the roof over their heads, and absorbed their constant criticisms about my lack of a husband and my boring practical career. The sadness evaporated, leaving behind a sharp, focused anger. If they wanted to play games, they were dealing with the wrong person. They had underestimated the very skills they constantly mocked. I was not just a dark cloud. I was a professional at uncovering hidden tracks. I pulled my laptop from my work bag and opened it, staring at the glowing screen. I did not know where they had gone yet, but I knew exactly how to find out. I opened a new tab on my browser, my fingers hovering over the keyboard with the familiar readiness they possessed every Monday morning at my firm. When you audit financial data for a living, you learn very quickly that people always leave a digital footprint. Always. My parents were not criminal masterminds, they were just arrogant, and arrogant people are inherently sloppy. I started with the basics, pulling up the shared family calendar application we use to coordinate grocery runs and maintenance appointments for the house. The weekend block was completely empty, wiped clean of any events. I checked my email, searching for any forwarded flight itineraries or hotel confirmations that my mother might have accidentally sent to my inbox instead of her own. Nothing. They had been surprisingly meticulous about keeping this particular secret hidden from my immediate view. But I knew my sister. Brittany possessed an insatiable need for validation that bordered on a psychological addiction. If she was doing something expensive, exclusive, and out of my reach, there was absolutely no way she could keep it to herself. The entire point of her existence was to make sure other people knew she was living a better life than they were. I navigated to Facebook, a platform I rarely checked anymore, but one where my family maintained a highly curated, heavily filtered presence. As the home feed loaded, the algorithm immediately pushed my sister's profile to the very top of the page. A bright, pulsing ring circled her profile picture, indicating a newly posted story. I took a slow, deep breath, bracing myself for whatever I was about to see, and clicked on the glowing circle. The screen filled with a high-definition video, and instantly, the quiet of my kitchen was shattered by the shrill, artificial excitement of Brittany's voice playing through my laptop speakers. The camera panned across the spacious, luxurious interior of a domestic first-class cabin. The plush leather seats were massive, offering plenty of legroom, and the brilliant morning sunlight streaming through the oversized airplane windows illuminated the scene with a golden cinematic glow. There was my father, Richard, reclining in his wide seat, laughing heartily as he raised a crystal flute of champagne toward the camera lens. Beside him sat my mother, Susan, wearing a brand new cashmere travel wrap, her hair freshly blown out and perfectly styled. She blew a kiss to the camera, looking more relaxed and joyful than she ever did when she was pacing around the house I paid for. The camera swung around to capture Kevin, my brother-in-law, flashing his signature arrogant grin while adjusting his expensive designer sunglasses. Finally, the lens flipped to show Brittany herself, her perfectly manicured hand holding a mimosa, her face glowing with a smug, triumphant smile. I paused the video, staring at the frozen frame of my family celebrating their grand escape. Right across the center of the screen, typed in bold, sparkling pink letters, was a caption that made my chest tighten to the point of pain. It read, "Heading to Aspen for the best trip ever. So glad the dark cloud is not here to ruin the vibe, LOL." I read the words over and over again. The dark cloud. That was their favorite nickname for me. It was the label they slapped onto me whenever I asked them to adhere to a basic household budget, or reminded my mother to pay her portion of the utility bills, or pointed out the obvious financial flaws in Kevin's latest startup scheme. Being responsible, being practical, and carrying the financial weight of 4 adults on my shoulders had earned me the title of a dark cloud. I stared at their smiling faces, captured in high definition, soaring 30,000 feet in the air toward one of the most expensive mountain resort towns in the entire country. A lesser person might have slammed the laptop shut and burst into tears. A lesser person might have picked up the phone, called them and screamed into the receiver, demanding to know how they could be so incredibly cruel and heartless. But I did not shed a single tear. The initial sting of betrayal was quickly hardening into something entirely different. It was a cold, sharp, and highly focused energy. Aspen, Colorado. That was their destination. I knew from my professional experience that a last-minute first-class flight to Aspen on a major holiday weekend, combined with the kind of luxury accommodations my sister always demanded, would easily cost tens of thousands of dollars. That was the missing piece of data that violently nagged at my auditor brain. Where did the money come from? My father was drowning in debt, relying entirely on my generosity to keep a roof over his head. My mother had not worked a paying job in 2 decades. Brittany worked a mid-level administrative job that barely covered her shopping habits, and Kevin's current tech startup was, as usual, generating zero actual revenue. None of them had the kind of liquid cash required to fund a spontaneous, ultra-luxurious getaway to a premium mountain resort. The math simply did not add up. I hit play on the video again, allowing it to loop a second time. I watched it with narrowed eyes, ignoring the hurtful caption and the laughing faces, focusing entirely on the background details. I watched it a third time, my eyes tracking the swift movement of the camera as Brittany panned from my parents across the center console toward Kevin. Right there. I hit the spacebar, freezing the frame at the exact second the camera swept past the small, polished wood tray table, separating Brittany and Kevin's seats. Resting carelessly next to a silver tray of complimentary mixed nuts was a credit card. It was not a standard plastic bank card. Even through the slight motion blur of the video, I recognized the distinctive heavy matte black metal finish. It was a premium, invitation-only credit card, the kind that came with an astronomical credit limit, massive travel rewards, and a dedicated concierge service. More importantly, it was a card that belonged exclusively to me. My breath hitched in my throat as I leaned closer to the screen, scrutinizing the frozen image to be absolutely certain. 3 years ago, when my parents first moved into my house after their catastrophic financial collapse, my mother had tearfully begged me for a safety net. She claimed she was terrified of having a sudden medical emergency while I was at work, terrified of not being able to pay for an ambulance or a vital prescription because her own credit cards had been completely maxed out and canceled by the banks. Against my better judgment, I had added her as an authorized user on my primary premium account. I handed her the sleek black card with one strict, explicitly stated condition. This was for life-or-death medical emergencies only. She had sworn up and down, tears streaming down her face, that she would never abuse my trust. Since she had never used it, and since my firm covered most of my daily expenses, I had practically forgotten she even had physical access to that specific line of credit. Until this very moment, I stared at the metal card sitting proudly on the first-class tray table. They had not just abandoned me on a holiday weekend. They had not just mocked me on social media for hundreds of people to see. They were funding their entire extravagant escape using my money. The expensive flights, the endless champagne, the upcoming luxury stay in Aspen, it was all being effortlessly charged to my account. They were literally making me pay for the privilege of being excluded and insulted. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. The profound sadness that had threatened to consume me just an hour ago was entirely gone, replaced by a massive surge of pure, unadulterated power. My family thought they had successfully pulled off the ultimate trick. They thought they could leave the dark cloud behind while they basked in the sunlight of my hard-earned financial stability. But they forgot one very important detail about the woman they were dealing with. I was the one who controlled the weather. I reached for my phone, my fingers perfectly steady and precise, and opened my secure banking application. The biometric scanner on my phone recognized my face and unlocked the device with a soft, confirming click. The banking application loaded its familiar blue and white interface, filling the screen. I bypassed my primary checking and savings accounts, scrolling down to the section dedicated to my secondary credit lines. There, nestled at the bottom of the list, was the account I had specifically opened for my mother. The account that was strictly designated for life-or-death medical emergencies. For the past 3 years, the balance on that card had faithfully remained at zero. I expected to see a few unauthorized charges, perhaps a few $100s for an extravagant meal or a spontaneous shopping spree. What I saw instead made the air rush completely out of my lungs. The current balance was glaring back at me in thick, bold numbers. $34,850. I blinked, leaning closer to the glowing screen, as if the digital display might somehow rearrange itself into a more reasonable figure. But the number remained unchanged. My mother had not just bent the rules of our agreement, she had taken a sledgehammer to them. A profound, echoing silence filled the kitchen as I tapped on the account to view the itemized list of pending and posted transactions. As a financial data auditor, I spent 40 hours a week reconstructing timelines from scattered receipts and hidden ledgers. Reconstructing my family's betrayal took less than 30 seconds. The digital footprint painted a masterpiece of premeditated deception. 3 days ago, on Wednesday afternoon, a charge for $8,400 had cleared for a major airline. 4 round-trip first-class tickets to Aspen, Colorado. I remembered exactly what I was doing on Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting at this very kitchen island, exhausted after a 10-hour shift, while my mother poured me a glass of iced tea. She had patted my hand, smiling with that warm maternal glow, and reminded me to keep my weekend completely clear because she was planning something incredibly special just for me. While she was looking me right in the eyes and delivering that promise, my credit card was actively processing the purchase of their escape. I scrolled further down the screen, my finger tracing the chronological descent of their spending spree. There was a charge for $600 at an exclusive ski apparel boutique downtown. That explained the luxurious cashmere wrap my mother was flaunting in Brittany's video. Below that, a charge for $800 at a premium wine merchant. They had not just purchased champagne for the flight. They had stocked up on expensive vintage bottles to celebrate their successful heist. There were charges for a luxury black car airport transfer service, designer sunglasses, and premium travel accessories. They had treated my emergency medical fund like a limitless lottery winning. But the largest transaction, the one that accounted for the bulk of the staggering balance, was a pending authorization posted just yesterday evening. $20,000 flat. The merchant name listed next to the massive charge was Pinecrest Luxury Estate Management. It was a security deposit and rental fee for a high-end vacation villa. I stared at the name of the estate management company, letting the sheer audacity of their actions wash over me. $20,000. That was more than my sister earned in 6 months at her administrative job. That was money I had painstakingly saved, waking up at dawn, working weekends, and sacrificing my own vacations, all to ensure my parents would never face the humiliation of bankruptcy again. I had given up my social life, delayed my own personal goals, and accepted the title of the Dark Cloud just to keep this family afloat. And in return, they had drained my safety net to fund a lavish mountain retreat for Kevin and Brittany. A strange, almost foreign physical sensation began to spread through my chest. It was not the familiar, heavy ache of a daughter realizing she was unloved. It was not the stinging, desperate urge to cry that had plagued my entire childhood whenever my parents chose my sister over me. My tear ducts were completely dry. Instead, my heart rate steadied, settling into a calm, rhythmic beat. A slow, chilling smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. For years, I had allowed them to manipulate my emotions because I believed that deep down, they were just flawed people who struggled to show affection. I had excused their financial parasitism because I thought it was my duty, as the responsible, capable daughter, to provide for them. But looking at the itemized list of their theft, the final veil of illusion was ripped away. This was not thoughtlessness. This was not a simple lack of consideration. This was calculated, malicious exploitation. They viewed me not as a family member, but as a bank vault, to be raided whenever it suited their desires. My mother had probably rationalized it in her head, convincing herself that because I had a good job, I would not miss the money. She likely told my father and Kevin that I had authorized the trip as a gift feeding their delusions of grandeur. And Brittany, always eager to showcase a lifestyle she could not afford, had happily gone along with it, using the stolen luxury to mock me publicly on the internet. They thought they had won. They were currently soaring through the sky, sipping stolen champagne, completely confident that the dutiful, boring, practical dark cloud back in Denver would simply absorb the financial blow just like she always did. They expected me to discover the charges, throw a fit, and then ultimately pay the bill to keep the peace. They relied on my predictability, but they had forgotten the most fundamental rule of credit. The person whose name is on the account holds all the power. With a sense of absolute clarity, I navigated to the security settings within the banking application. The interface presented me with a list of options for the compromised card. I did not hesitate. I bypassed the temporary freeze option and scrolled directly to the bottom of the menu. I tapped the bold red button labeled Report Fraud and Permanently Lock Card. A prompt appeared on the screen asking me to confirm the action. It warned that this process was irreversible, that all future authorizations would be immediately declined, and that a new card would need to be issued. It also asked if I recognized the recent transactions. I checked the box stating that the charges were entirely unauthorized. I checked the box stating that the physical card was no longer in my possession. I pressed confirm. A small loading circle spun on the screen for 3 agonizingly slow seconds. Then a green checkmark appeared, accompanied by a polite digital notification. Your card has been permanently locked. All pending transactions will be reviewed by our fraud department. Any new attempts to use this card will be automatically declined. I set the phone down on the marble kitchen island. The silence in the house no longer felt oppressive or lonely. It felt victorious. The trap had been sprung not by them, but by me. Right now, my parents, my sister, and her arrogant husband were landing in Aspen. They were about to step off their first-class flight and attempt to rent a car or buy lunch or perhaps secure another round of expensive drinks to celebrate their arrival. And when they handed over that heavy black metal card, they were going to encounter a very hard, very embarrassing wall of reality. I leaned back in my chair, imagining the exact look on Kevin's face when a waiter or a luxury concierge handed the card back with a sympathetic, pitying smile, informing him that the transaction had been declined. I imagined my mother's rising panic as she realized her endless fountain of funding had just run completely dry in one of the most expensive zip codes in America. They were stranded. They had no backup funds, no savings of their own, and no way to maintain the illusion of wealth they so desperately craved. I walked over to the coffee maker, plugged it back in, and began preparing a fresh pot. I hummed a quiet, cheerful tune as the aroma of dark roast coffee filled the kitchen. I did not need to cry. I did not need to scream or pack my bags or demand answers. I simply needed to wait. The storm was coming for them, and for the first time in my 34 years of life, I was perfectly happy to be the dark cloud. The sharp, vibrating buzz of my phone against the marble island shattered the peaceful silence of the kitchen. I did not even need to look at the screen to know who was calling. But I picked it up anyway, watching my mother's contact photo flash brightly. Susan. I let it ring 3 times, enjoying the sheer desperation implied by the rapid, frantic chimes, before I casually slid my thumb across the glass to answer. "Whitney!" My mother shrieked into the speaker, her voice instantly reaching an octave that made the digital audio distort. "What on earth is going on with the card?" "We are standing right here at the Aspen Marina, and the manager just handed it back to us in front of everyone. He said it was permanently locked for fraud. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? Fix it right now." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my fresh coffee, letting the silence stretch between us until her breathing grew ragged on the other end of the line. "I told you that card was for life or death medical emergencies, Mom. I said, keeping my tone completely flat and measured. Last time I checked, renting a private yacht in Aspen does not require an emergency room visit. How dare you use that tone with me? Susan exploded. Her background noise filled with the ambient sounds of chatter and lapping water. We are on a family trip. Kevin just closed a massive new investment round for his startup, and we needed to celebrate. He is going to host a networking dinner on the lake for his new business partners. This is crucial for his career. Why are you always so selfish and bitter? Unblock the card immediately. I leaned against the counter, looking out at my quiet, sunny backyard. Selfish. The word was so predictable coming from her. Whenever I established a boundary or refused to fund their desires, I was selfish. The card is permanently canceled, Mom, I replied, my voice cool and devoid of any emotion. I reported it stolen and flagged the charges for fraud. Because that is exactly what this is. Fraud. There was a sudden, sharp intake of breath on her end, followed by the muffled sound of her shuffling away from the crowd. Are you out of your mind, Whitney? She hissed, dropping her voice into a furious whisper. Fraud? You gave me that card. I gave you access to a safety net for medical crises. I reminded her, each word sharp and clear. I did not give you a blank check to fly first class, buy cashmere wraps, and rent a $20,000 villa while you leave a sticky note on my fridge telling me to fix my own lunch because I am too much of a dark cloud to be around. Susan went dead silent for 2 full seconds. She had not realized I saw the social media posts. She had not expected me to check Brittany's story. When she spoke again, the faux maternal warmth was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, sharp venom. So that is what this is about, she sneered. You are throwing a temper tantrum because we did not invite you. You are jealous. You have always been jealous of Brittany. She has a handsome, successful husband who takes her places, and you are sitting alone in your boring house with your boring job. You could not stand seeing her happy for one weekend, so you decided to ruin everything. I almost laughed at the absurdity of her logic. It was breathtaking how quickly she could twist her own theft into my moral failing. Brittany's husband does not take her places, Mom, I said smoothly. I do. My money paid for those plane tickets, my money paid for your wine, and my money paid the deposit on that estate. Kevin did not contribute a single cent, did he? Whitney, listen to me, Susan demanded, ignoring my question entirely. Kevin is going to reimburse you as soon as his investment funds clear next week. He just needs a few days. You are ruining a multi-million-dollar business deal over a minor misunderstanding. Mingle back into the application and tell the bank it was an error. If we get kicked out of this marina, Kevin's investors are going to walk. Is that what you want? To ruin your brother-in-law's future? I listened to her panic, feeling a profound sense of detachment. She was not asking how I was doing. She was not apologizing for lying to me for 6 weeks. She was not expressing a single shred of remorse for stealing $34,000 from her own daughter. Her only concern was protecting the fragile ego of a man who lived off my hard work. I do not care about Kevin's deal, I said, setting my coffee cup down with a soft click. And I do not care about your vacation. The card is gone. The bank is investigating the charges. You can figure out how to pay for your own lunch. Whitney, do not you dare hang up on me, she screamed, her voice rising in panic. We are hundreds of miles from home. We have no way to pay for the rental car or the estate. You cannot just leave your family stranded. Watch me, I said. Before she could utter another word, I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red disconnect button. The shrieking voice vanished instantly, replaced once again by the peaceful silence of my home. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool mountain air from the open window fill my lungs. My family thought they had left me trapped in a dark room, isolated and forgotten, while they enjoyed the high life at my expense. They thought my practical, analytical nature made me weak, predictable, and easy to exploit. but they had made a fatal error in their calculations. They had brought the battle right to my doorstep, onto the exact terrain I spent my entire career mastering. My phone began to vibrate in my hand again. I looked down at the screen. It was not my mother this time. The caller ID displayed my father's name, Richard. I let it vibrate, watching the screen light up over and over, before I calmly slid the phone into my pocket, walked over to my desk, and opened the real estate files for Pinecrest Luxury Estate. The thick manila folder contained everything I needed to know about my most recent and arguably most lucrative investment property. I had just spread the property deed and the local rental agreements across the smooth wooden surface of my desk when my phone began to buzz again. The vibration against my thigh was insistent and angry. I pulled the device out and looked at the bright screen. Richard. My father was calling. I stared at his name, feeling a familiar wave of heavy exhaustion wash over me. In any normal family, a father calling his daughter would be a sign of protection or genuine care. In my family, a call from Richard meant someone needed a financial bailout, a convenient excuse, or a reliable scapegoat to blame for their own mistakes. I tapped the green button and brought the phone to my ear, not saying a single word. I wanted to hear exactly how he would attempt to frame this disaster. "Whitney, what is wrong with you?" My father barked into the receiver the second the line connected. His voice was thick with that arrogant, booming tone he always used when he wanted to intimidate someone into complete submission. "Your mother is in tears right now. She said you canceled the credit card out of pure spite. Do you have any idea how much pressure your sister is under right now? Brittany has been working herself to the bone to support Kevin during this critical investment cycle. They needed this trip to decompress and network with high-level executives. And you, as usual, have to go and ruin everything just because you feel left out." I sat down in my heavy desk chair, resting my hand flat on the property deed for the Aspen Villa. "I was not left out, Dad," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of the toxic guilt he was actively trying to inflict upon me. "I was deliberately abandoned. You told me to keep my schedule open for a special family weekend, and then you used my emergency medical funds to fly first class to a luxury ski resort. That is not me feeling left out. That is me stopping a massive theft." "Do not use that word with me!" my father snapped, the raw anger in his voice escalating sharply. "Nobody stole anything. It is a family card. We are a family. You make a ridiculous amount of money sitting in that stuffy office of yours, and you never spend a single dime on anything fun or important. You owe it to your sister to help her out. She is building a brand. She is building a lifestyle. You just do not understand the kind of immense pressure she is under, because you are just a boring salaried worker. You sit at a desk all day crunching numbers. You have absolutely no idea what it takes to make it in the real business world." I closed my eyes for a brief second, letting the sheer audacity of his words sink deep into my mind. A boring salaried worker. That was exactly how he viewed the meticulous, demanding career that had literally kept a solid roof over his head for the past 3 years. "Let us talk about the real business world, Dad," I said, leaning forward and tracing the sharp edge of the real estate folder with my index finger. 3 years ago, your brilliant business strategies resulted in a complete financial collapse. You lost your beautiful house, you lost your retirement savings, you maxed out every credit card to your name, and you were weeks away from declaring total bankruptcy. Who bailed you out? Was it Brittany, with her imaginary brand and her expensive lifestyle? Was it Kevin, with his fake tech startups? No. It was me, the boring, salaried worker. I paid off your outstanding debts. I moved you and Mom into my house. I gave you my master bedroom, and I took the smaller guest room upstairs so you would not feel humiliated by your failure. I have paid for your groceries, your utilities, and your medical insurance every single month for 36 months. There was a brief tense silence on the line. but I knew him far too well to think he was reflecting on my words. He was not absorbing the truth. He was simply reloading his ammunition to attack me from a different angle. "You are throwing that in my face now?" he demanded, his tone dripping with self-righteous indignation. "Parents take care of their children, and children take care of their parents. That is how a family operates. We raised you. We put food on your table when you were a child. You owed us that help. But you have always held it over our heads. You have always used your money to control us. That is exactly why Brittany did not want you on this trip. You bring everyone down. You constantly demand that we look at budgets and practical spreadsheets. You cannot just let people be happy and enjoy their success. You are a massive buzzkill, Whitney. You have always been a dark cloud hanging over this family." I looked down at the documents on my desk. The physical evidence of my hard work, my smart investments, and my complete independence. I had spent my entire adult life trying to be the reliable, sturdy foundation for a family that only valued shiny, empty facades. When Brittany managed to keep a receptionist job for 6 months, my parents threw her a lavish dinner party and bought her a designer watch to celebrate her incredible work ethic. When I was promoted to senior financial data auditor, managing multi-million-dollar corporate accounts, my father simply nodded and asked if my new salary meant I could finally buy him that upgraded golf club membership he had been eyeing. "I am a dark cloud because I absolutely refuse to live in your fantasy world," I told him, my voice dropping to a low, quiet register that forced him to stop yelling and listen to me. "Kevin has not secured any real funding. He has been pitching the exact same non-existent app for 4 years without a single client. Brittany is not building a brand. She is pretending to be rich on the internet using my hard-earned money. And you and Mom are actively enabling them because you would rather pretend you are part of some wealthy elite family than admit that you are entirely dependent on the daughter you clearly despise." "How dare you speak to me like that?" my father roared, his pride deeply wounded by the absolute, undeniable truth of my words. "You listen to me right now. You are going to call your bank and you are going to authorize those charges. We have a $20,000 security deposit pending on this estate, and if it bounces, we are going to look like complete fools in front of Kevin's investors. You are going to fix this, Whitney, or so help me, you will deeply regret it. I will pack my bags, and your mother and I will move out of your house. We will never speak to you again. You will be completely alone." He delivered the threat like it was a lethal weapon. He truly believed that the worst possible punishment he could ever inflict upon me was his absence. He thought I was so desperate for their tiny crumbs of affection that the mere threat of losing them would force me to comply with his outrageous demands. He had absolutely no idea that he was offering me the exact gift I had been trying to figure out how to give myself for years. I looked at the paperwork for Pinecrest Luxury Estate spread across my desk. My father was obsessing over the $20,000 deposit, but he had no idea why that merchant name had made me stop breathing when I first saw it. The folder contained a fact none of them had bothered to uncover. A fact that made his threat to abandon my house almost laughably hollow. I kept my eyes on the documents and let him keep talking. "Are you threatening to move out of my house, Dad?" I asked, allowing a genuine, relaxed smile to spread across my face. "I am promising it," he spat back. "You either fix this card right now or your mother and I are done with you forever. We will go live with Brittany and Kevin. They actually respect us. They actually know how to treat family. So what is it going to be? Are you going to stop being a selfish brat, or are you going to lose your parents?" I took a deep, refreshing breath, savoring the crisp morning air flowing through my office window. I thought about the decades of subtle insults, the constant comparisons to my sister, the unending financial drain, and the profound emotional exhaustion of being the family scapegoat. I thought about the yellow sticky note on the refrigerator and the champagne toast on the airplane. "Enjoy Aspen, Dad," I said softly, And good luck with the deposit. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red disconnect button, cutting off whatever angry response he was forming. I placed the phone face down on the desk and pushed it away. They had made their choice, and they had drawn their rigid line in the sand. Now it was time for me to enforce the consequences of their actions. I turned my attention fully back to the Pinecrest luxury estate files. It was time to introduce my family to the real business world. Before I could slide the Pinecrest folder open, my phone began vibrating again. This time, it was not a call. A string of notification banners marched across the screen, one after another, all from Brittany. 9 voice messages, 3 photographs, 2 short videos. She had apparently decided that if our parents could not frighten me into restoring the card, she would humiliate me into doing it. I pressed play on the first message and set the phone on speaker. Brittany said, her voice coated in the slow, exaggerated patience she used when she wanted to make me feel stupid. I do not know what kind of dramatic stunt you are pulling, but you need to stop. Mom is crying, Dad is furious, and Kevin has important people waiting on him. You are embarrassing all of us because you cannot handle being excluded from one weekend. The second message arrived before the first one finished playing. Her tone had sharpened. You were not invited because you make everything miserable. Every dinner turns into a lecture about spending. Every celebration turns into an audit. Nobody wants to sit in a beautiful place while you stare at the menu prices and ask whether everyone has updated their retirement accounts. This trip was supposed to be fun. Adults are allowed to enjoy themselves without asking your permission. I leaned back in my chair and listened without interrupting. For years, Brittany had depended on immediate emotional reactions. If I defended myself, she called me unstable. If I became angry, she told our parents I was jealous. If I cried, she used my tears as proof that I was too sensitive to be included. Silence denied her the performance she wanted, so her messages became increasingly cruel. The third recording opened with laughter in the background and the pop of another champagne cork. You should see this place, she said. Pinecrest luxury estate is unbelievable. Heated driveway, mountain views, private hot tub, imported furniture, the whole thing. This is what success looks like, Whitney. Maybe you would understand if you had a husband with ambition instead of spending every night alone with spreadsheets. My eyes moved slowly toward the thick folder resting beneath my hand. Pinecrest Luxury Estate. She said the name casually, stretching each word as if she were unveiling a royal palace. She had no idea that the name was printed across the documents on my desk. She had no idea how much information those documents contained, or why hearing her boast about that particular property changed the shape of the entire situation. I played the next message. And before you start whining about the card, Kevin can easily repay you, Brittany continued. His funding is already handled. The only reason we used Mom's card was because the reservation system needed one account for the full booking, and yours has better travel benefits. You should be grateful. You are going to get all those reward points without doing anything. That explanation was so absurd that I almost admired it. They had stolen more than $34,000, publicly mocked me, and now Brittany expected gratitude because the theft might generate airline points? A photograph appeared beneath the recordings. Brittany had taken a wide shot of the main living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the mountains. A limestone fireplace rose 2 stories high. My mother stood beside it, holding a wineglass, while my father examined a carved wooden cabinet. Kevin was visible near the sliding doors, speaking to 2 men in tailored jackets. Across the image, Brittany had added glittering text, "This is how winners spend Labor Day." The second photograph showed the master bedroom. My mother was sitting on the edge of the bed in a white robe, smiling, as though she owned the place. The third showed several cases of liquor stacked near the kitchen island. None of those people appeared stranded or concerned about a failed credit card. They were settling in for a party. Then the first video began playing. Brittany slowly panned across the back deck, narrating every expensive feature. She pointed out the heated pool, the cedar seating area, the stone fire pit, and the panoramic view. At the end of the clip, Kevin stepped into frame and wrapped an arm around her waist. "Tell your sister not to worry," he said loudly enough for the phone to capture every word. "Once the investors see tonight's event, this entire weekend becomes a business expense." Brittany laughed and turned the camera back toward herself. "See," she said, "real business, not sitting in a cubicle checking other people's numbers." I replayed that final sentence. Tonight's event, investors, business expense. They had not merely rented a vacation home. They intended to use it as an unapproved corporate venue, and they were planning to do it on a property booked under my mother's name with my stolen credit card. The messages continued. Brittany accused me of resenting her marriage. She said our parents preferred traveling with her because she knew how to make them feel young. She claimed I had chosen loneliness by caring more about numbers than relationships. Finally, in the 9th recording, her voice dropped into a smug whisper. "Open the card by 6 Whitney. If you do not, Mom and Dad are done with you. And honestly, that might be best for everyone. Kevin and I are building a real future. We cannot keep dragging someone around who wants all of us to fail." I saved every recording to a secure folder. Their insults no longer hurt in the way Brittany intended. Each message was evidence. She had admitted the card was used knowingly. She had acknowledged that the rental was connected to Kevin's business. She had documented the property, the liquor, and the planned gathering. Her need to show off had handed me a time-stamped record of their intent before the first unauthorized guest even arrived. I opened the public booking confirmation attached to the charge and compared the property address with the address in my private records. Same parcel number, same management company, same reservation dates. My mother had signed the electronic agreement without reading beyond the photographs and the list of amenities. Brittany had probably never looked at the contract at all. If she had, she would have noticed the 6-person occupancy limit, the absolute ban on parties, and the $30,000 penalty for unauthorized events. A cold smile settled across my face. For most of my life, my family had mistaken restraint for weakness. They thought that because I did not advertise what I owned nothing. They thought a woman who wore practical clothes, drove a reliable car, and spent her evenings studying investment reports must be poor, lonely, and desperate for their approval. Brittany believed the estate surrounding her was evidence of Kevin's success. In reality, every polished surface, every heated stone, and every carefully protected acre belonged to a world I had built without telling any of them. I placed the phone beside the laptop and finally pulled the thick folder fully into the light. The corporate name on the deed meant nothing to my family, but it meant everything to me. Pinecrest was not simply a property I recognized. It was one of my most valuable investments. And my family had just announced in their own voices exactly how they planned to violate it. They had no idea the real owner was already watching every move. The file folder resting on my desk was thick-bound with a rubber band and labeled with a string of alphanumeric codes that meant nothing to an outside observer. To me, however, those codes represented years of relentless discipline. Working as a senior financial data auditor was not just a job to me. It was a daily education in the intricate mechanics of wealth. I spent my days dissecting the portfolios of the ultra-rich, studying exactly how they shielded their assets, mitigated their tax liabilities, and multiplied their capital while remaining invisible to the public eye. I did not just audit their data. I absorbed their strategies and applied them to my own life. When I started making significant money, I did not buy a flashy sports car or a closet full of designer handbags like my sister would have done. I lived well below my means and quietly established a series of limited liability companies to hold my investments. One of those companies, registered under a generic corporate name in Delaware, held the title to a sprawling multi-million-dollar mountain property in Aspen, Colorado. That property was officially known on the luxury rental market as Pinecrest Luxury Estate. I had closed on the house just 3 months ago. It was a highly calculated acquisition, purchased during a brief dip in the market, designed to generate massive seasonal rental income from wealthy tourists and corporate executives looking for an exclusive alpine retreat. I had hired a top-tier property management firm to handle the daily operations, explicitly instructing them to maintain strict confidentiality regarding the identity of the owner. Not even the local property manager knew my real name. To them, I was just a faceless corporate entity, represented by a team of lawyers and accountants in another state. The sheer, staggering irony of the current situation washed over me, sending a thrill of adrenaline straight down my spine. My family, who had spent the last 34 years treating me like a pathetic, boring failure, had just used my stolen emergency medical funds to pay an exorbitant security deposit to my own holding company. They were literally standing inside my living room, sleeping in my beds, and looking down their noses at me, completely unaware that they were trespassing on my territory. My father had just screamed at me, threatening to move out of my house in Denver so he could go live in the Aspen estate that he falsely believed Kevin's non-existent investors were paying for. He thought he was choosing the glamorous, successful life of his golden child over the bleak existence of his dark cloud daughter. He had absolutely no idea that the glittering, luxurious world he was so desperately trying to cling to was actually built, owned, and controlled entirely by me. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair, letting out a breath that felt lighter than air. For my entire life, my mother had spun a carefully crafted narrative about her two daughters. Brittany was the shining star, destined for greatness, beauty, and high society. I was the sturdy, unglamorous workhorse, useful only for carrying the heavy loads and sweeping up the messes left behind by their careless decisions. They had mocked my frugality at every opportunity. They had sneered at my practical clothing and my quiet weekends spent reading or reviewing investment portfolios. They thought my lack of a flashy social media presence meant I had nothing worth showing off. They equated visibility with success, completely blind to the reality that true wealth is almost always silent. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out my personal iPad. I tapped the smooth glass screen, bringing the device to life, and swiped past the standard applications until I found the specialized software installed by my property management company. The application was designed to give the property owner complete oversight of the estate from anywhere in the world. It monitored everything from the ambient temperature of the master suite to the operational status of the heated driveway. More importantly, it provided me with direct, real-time access to the extensive network of high-definition security cameras installed along the entire exterior perimeter of the property. I had insisted on top-of-the-line surveillance when I bought the place. Aspen attracted a highly demanding clientele, and I needed to ensure my multi-million-dollar investment was fiercely protected against property damage, unauthorized gatherings, and liability issues. The rental contract for Pinecrest Luxury Estate was notoriously strict, drafted by expensive attorneys who left no room for misinterpretation. It included ironclad clauses prohibiting any guests beyond the registered party, absolutely forbidding parties or large events, and imposing massive financial penalties for any violation of the noise ordinances or community guidelines. I knew the contract intimately because I had written the financial penalty structures myself. I tapped the camera icon on the screen. The application loaded for a brief second before a grid of 12 separate video feeds populated the display. The cameras were positioned strategically around the massive property. One covered the towering iron front gates, another was angled down the long, sweeping driveway. Two cameras monitored the expansive wraparound wooden deck that offered panoramic views of the snow-capped mountains. Several more covered the private outdoor hot tub area, the side entrances, and the detached garage. The video quality was pristine, capturing the crisp afternoon light of the Colorado mountains. I clicked on the feed labeled Front Entrance, expanding the video to fill the entire screen of the iPad. I watched the live feed, the slight rustle of the giant pine trees in the wind, visible even through the silent video. I sat there in my quiet Denver office, hundreds of miles away, and watched my own family inhabiting my secret world. The large, heavy oak front door of the villa swung open, and I saw my brother-in-law Kevin step out onto the front porch. He was holding a phone to his ear, pacing back and forth with an agitated, frantic energy. He kicked a small pile of decorative stones off the edge of the porch, running his free hand aggressively through his perfectly styled hair. He looked absolutely nothing like the smug, victorious man raising a glass of champagne in the first-class cabin just a few hours earlier. The harsh reality of having the stolen credit card declined at the marina was clearly beginning to set in. He was likely scrambling, calling his non-existent investors, or trying to secure a last-minute loan to cover the extravagant lifestyle he had promised my sister. But Kevin's isolated panic on the front porch was only the beginning of the spectacle. I swiped my finger across the glass screen again, switching the view from the front entrance to the camera overlooking the massive back deck. The scene unfolding there made my eyes narrow and my pulse quicken with fresh, sharp anticipation. I had anticipated that my family would try to salvage their ruined afternoon by simply relaxing at the stolen villa, maybe opening the expensive wine they had already fraudulently purchased before the card was locked. I expected them to sulk, to argue, and to plot their next move against me. I had certainly not anticipated the sheer scale of the chaotic disaster they were actively preparing to orchestrate on my property. They were about to hand me the ultimate weapon to permanently destroy their perfect facade. The high-definition camera feed overlooking the massive wooden deck of the Pinecrest luxury estate provided a crystal-clear view of the impending disaster. The sun was just beginning its descent behind the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains, casting long shadows across the pristine property. I watched in stunned fascination as the heavy glass sliding doors that separated the main living room from the outdoor entertainment space were shoved violently open. My sister Brittany stepped out into the crisp mountain air, wearing a sparkling, impractical cocktail dress that was entirely unsuitable for the altitude. She was holding a massive, oversized bottle of champagne in one hand and her smartphone in the other, her arm extended high above her head as she actively broadcasted her stolen luxury to her modest social media following. Right behind her, the true scale of their audacity began to spill out onto my beautiful, custom-built cedar deck. It was not just my parents joining her for a quiet evening of wine. It was a relentless, surging wave of people. I sat frozen in my desk chair, my eyes glued to the glowing screen of my iPad, as dozens of strangers poured out of my house. There were men in expensive ski sweaters and women wrapped in designer faux fur coats. They were loud, chaotic, and completely unbothered by the serene nature of the neighborhood. I watched as more and more bodies crammed onto the outdoor space. I started counting them automatically, my auditor brain refusing to shut down even in the face of such a surreal spectacle. 10, 20, 30. By the time the flow of bodies finally stopped, there had to be at least 40 people swarming the back deck and spilling out toward the edge of the private, heated infinity pool. Kevin emerged from the house a few minutes later, looking vastly different from the panicked man I had observed on the front porch camera just a short while ago. He had apparently decided to mask his private financial terror with public arrogance. He was carrying a silver tray loaded with premium liquor bottles, playing the role of the generous, wealthy host to absolute perfection. He circulated through the dense crowd, slapping the backs of men he was likely trying to impress, pouring heavy drinks and gesturing expansively toward the sweeping mountain vistas as if he personally owned the entire valley. I leaned closer to the screen, watching the absolute mayhem unfold with a sense of cold, detached precision. The rental agreement for Pinecrest Luxury Estate was not a standard template printed off the internet. It was a rigorous, meticulously crafted legal document that I had spent weeks refining with top-tier attorneys in Colorado. Aspen is an incredibly exclusive, highly regulated community. The local homeowner associations and municipal noise ordinances are unforgiving, and property damage in these homes can escalate into the hundreds of thousands of dollars within minutes. To protect my investment, I had instituted a zero-tolerance policy for unauthorized events. The contract my parents had eagerly signed, using my stolen emergency medical card to secure their booking, contained several explicit, non-negotiable clauses. Clause 4 stated clearly that the maximum occupancy of the estate was strictly limited to 6 registered guests at any given time. Clause 7 outlined an absolute, categorical ban on all parties' large gatherings and corporate events. Clause 9, the most critical section of the entire document, detailed the immediate consequences of violating the previous rules. Any breach of the occupancy limit or the party ban resulted in immediate, non-refundable eviction from the premises. Furthermore, it triggered an automatic, non-negotiable punitive damage fee of $30,000 charged instantly to the card on file to cover deep cleaning, potential structural damage, and neighborhood disturbance fines. I watched the video feed observing my sister, dancing wildly near the edge of the hot tub, completely oblivious to the legal and financial anvil suspended precariously above her head. They had already violated Clause 4 and Clause 7 simultaneously. But as the evening progressed and the shadows lengthened across the deck, the situation escalated from a simple contract violation into something far more severe. The ambient lighting of the outdoor entertainment space flickered on automatically as dusk settled over the mountains. The high-definition night vision capabilities of my security system kicked in, rendering the chaotic scene in stark, unforgiving clarity. The party was rapidly descending into complete, unhinged debauchery. I watched as a group of Kevin's supposed business associates dragged one of my custom-upholstered outdoor sofas closer to the edge of the deck, spilling dark red wine across the pale fabric. The casual destruction of my property made my jaw clench, but I forced myself to remain completely still, letting the cameras capture every single moment of their reckless behavior. My eyes darted to a secluded corner of the deck near the massive stone fire pit. A small group of guests had huddled together, their backs turned toward the main crowd. The high-resolution lens caught the unmistakable furtive movements of illicit activity. Small glass vials and reflective surfaces were being passed around the tight circle. It was not just an unauthorized gathering with excessive alcohol. They had brought illegal substances onto my property. The liability risks associated with that kind of activity were astronomical. But in this specific moment, it simply provided me with an impenetrable wall of evidence. I opened the recording software on my iPad and began systematically capturing short, high-quality video clips of the most egregious violations. I recorded Brittany standing on top of a delicate glass patio table, her high heels dangerously close to shattering the surface. I captured Kevin aggressively popping a champagne cork that ricocheted off the custom wood siding of the house. I made absolutely sure to save a clear, undeniable clip of the group huddled by the fire pit, engaging in activities that would instantly void any insurance policy and invite immediate police intervention. I was not just watching a party. I was compiling a comprehensive, watertight audit of their spectacular downfall. The sheer arrogance required to treat a multi-million-dollar property with such blatant disrespect was staggering. but it perfectly encapsulated everything my family had ever stood for. They believed that rules, budgets, and concepts were concepts meant only for boring practical people like me. They believed that their shiny, superficial charm exempted them from accountability. They were about to learn a very expensive, very painful lesson about how the real world operates. I spent the next 2 hours sitting in my quiet, peaceful Denver office, watching the destruction of my Aspen property with the focused intensity of a predator studying its prey. Every spilled drink, every shattered glass, every screaming, laughing guest added another layer of concrete justification to the action I was about to take. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel the lingering toxic obligation to protect my parents or shield my sister from the consequences of her actions. That protective instinct had died the moment I saw the yellow sticky note on my refrigerator. Around 9 o'clock, flashing red and blue security patrol lights briefly illuminated the far edge of the long driveway camera feed. The situation was completely ripe. The evidence was entirely secured. I took a slow, deep breath and reached for my phone. The trap was fully loaded, perfectly primed, and finally ready to snap shut on them. I picked up my smartphone from the desk and set it aside for just a moment longer. Before I made the call, I needed to ensure that the digital dossier I was building was completely impenetrable. As an auditor, I knew that verbal accusations were worthless without hard, undeniable documentation to back them up. My family was incredibly skilled at gaslighting their way out of trouble. They had spent decades twisting facts, crying victim, and convincing outsiders that they were innocent. I was not going to give them a single millimeter of wiggle room this time. I turned back to my iPad and initiated the data export sequence on the property management application. I carefully selected the highest resolution video files I had captured over the past 2 hours. The first file was the clear, unobstructed footage of my sister swinging a massive champagne bottle and inviting dozens of unauthorized strangers through the sliding glass doors. The second file documented the blatant destruction of the custom upholstery on the deck furniture. The third and most critical file contained the zoomed-in, undeniable footage of the illegal substances being passed around the stone fire pit. I compressed the video files into a secure digital folder and attached the time-stamped activity log from the estate electronic gate, which proved that over 40 separate individuals had bypassed the security perimeter. Next, I opened my laptop and accessed the financial ledger for Pinecrest Luxury Estate. I generated a pristine, itemized PDF copy of the original rental contract that my parents had signed electronically. I highlighted Clause 4, detailing the strict 6-person occupancy limit. I highlighted Clause 7, outlining the absolute ban on parties and events. Finally, I highlighted Clause 9, which clearly stated the immediate eviction protocol and the mandatory $30,000 punitive damage fee. I merged the contract, the gate logs, and the video files into a single comprehensive email. I addressed the email to the primary contact at my Aspen property management firm, a highly efficient, no-nonsense man named Greg. Greg handled a portfolio of ultra-luxury rentals for high-net-worth clients. He was accustomed to dealing with demanding property owners, but he had never actually met me in person. To him, I was simply the managing director of the holding company that owned Pinecrest, communicating strictly through professional emails and occasional phone calls. He had absolutely no idea that the current tenants actively destroying the property were my own flesh and blood. To Greg, they were just another group of arrogant tourists who thought wealth exempted them from the rules. I hit send, watching the progress bar fill as the heavy files transmitted through the network. Once the email successfully landed in his inbox, I picked up my phone and dialed his direct emergency line. The line rang twice before Greg answered, his voice remarkably alert for a Saturday night. "Good evening, this is Greg with Aspen Elite Property Management. How can I help you?" "Greg, this is the managing director for the Pinecrest Luxury Estate," I said, keeping my voice cool, authoritative, and strictly professional. I just sent a high-priority email to your direct inbox. I need you to open it immediately. There was a brief rustling sound on the other end of the line, followed by the clatter of a keyboard. Of course, he replied, his tone shifting into immediate compliance. I am opening it right now. Is there an issue with the property? There is a massive breach of contract currently unfolding on the back deck, I informed him. My eyes still glued to the live camera feed, where the party was still raging at full volume. The registered guests have violated the occupancy limits, bypassed the party ban, and caused visible property damage to the outdoor furnishings. Furthermore, the security cameras have captured clear evidence of illegal substances being consumed on the premises. The liability risk to my holding company is currently unacceptable. I heard a sharp intake of breath as Greg opened the attached video files. I waited in silence as he watched the high-definition footage of my sister dancing on the glass table and the group huddled around the fire pit. This is completely unacceptable, Greg stated, his professional demeanor giving way to genuine outrage. I am so sorry about this. We screened this booking carefully, but sometimes these groups manage to hide their true intentions. I will send a security patrol over there right now to issue a noise warning and disperse the crowd. I tapped my fingernail against the wooden desk. You are not going to issue a warning, Greg. We are far past the point of warnings. I want the immediate execution of Clause 9. Greg hesitated for a fraction of a second. Clause 9. You mean the immediate eviction protocol. Are you absolutely certain? It is late, and processing a full eviction on a holiday weekend can get complicated. I am entirely certain, I replied, my voice leaving no room for negotiation or debate. The contract is explicitly clear. They brought illegal substances onto my property and invited 40 unauthorized individuals to treat a multi-million-dollar estate like a nightclub. You are going to enforce the contract exactly as it is written. Understood, Greg said, his tone turning crisp and decisive. I will print the eviction notice immediately. I will also process the $30,000 punitive damage fee to the credit card they have on file. I smiled into the empty room, knowing exactly what was going to happen when he attempted to run that transaction. You can certainly attempt to run the card on file, I told him smoothly. However, considering the reckless nature of these tenants, I strongly suspect that card will decline. If the payment fails to process, you are to add the $30,000 penalty to the eviction notice as an outstanding legal debt. They will be held personally liable for every single cent. I will ensure the paperwork reflects the full penalty, Greg assured me. However, I must warn you about one logistical issue. The local Aspen Police Department is currently dealing with a massive highway collision on the mountain pass. They just issued a county alert. They will not be able to provide a civil standby escort until first light tomorrow morning. Is it acceptable to execute the eviction at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning? I considered this for a moment. Letting them sleep off their intoxication only to be violently awakened by the consequences of their actions was incredibly poetic. 6 o'clock in the morning is perfectly acceptable, I told him. It will give them absolutely no time to prepare or hide their damages. They will wake up to the police pounding on the front door. You are to hand them the notice the second they open it. They will have 30 minutes to pack their belongings and vacate the premises. Once I hand them that notice, Greg confirmed, outlining the final parameters of the eviction process. I will not let them stall. I will not let them negotiate. If they attempt to argue, I will remind them that the police are standing right there and that trespassing charges will be filed if they do not comply immediately. I will have them off your property by sunrise. Consider it done, Greg promised. I will call you the second the property is secured. I ended the call. The trap was finally set. I watched the monitors, knowing they had absolutely no idea what tomorrow morning would bring. I did not sleep a single wink that night. The adrenaline coursing through my veins made rest entirely impossible. Instead, I stayed seated at my desk in Denver, keeping my eyes fixed on the live camera feeds from Aspen. The sprawling Pinecrest luxury estate looked incredibly peaceful under the cover of darkness. The chaotic party had finally burned itself out around 3 o'clock, leaving the massive wooden deck littered with shattered glass, empty liquor bottles, and the undeniable residue of their terrible decisions. The quiet was profound, but I knew it was only the temporary silence preceding a massive storm. As the digital clock on my laptop ticked toward 5:45, the sky above the Rocky Mountains began to turn a pale shade of purple. The high-definition cameras transitioned to full color as morning light crept across the peaks. Exactly 10 minutes later, a black sport utility vehicle bearing the property management logo turned onto the private driveway. Right behind it was a marked cruiser from the Aspen Police Department. I leaned forward, my heart beating in a victorious rhythm. The trap was about to snap shut. Greg stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was dressed in a sharp winter coat, holding a thick clipboard. Two police officers stepped out of the cruiser, adjusting their belts and walking with the kind of relaxed authority that comes from dealing with arrogant tourists. They approached the massive oak front doors of the estate. The microphone picked up the crisp sound of their boots crunching on the gravel. Greg did not hesitate. He raised his hand and pounded on the heavy wood with a forceful, commanding rhythm that echoed loudly through the quiet morning air. He waited exactly 10 seconds before pounding again, even louder this time. I watched the live feed, anticipating the exact sequence of events. It took nearly 3 full minutes before the heavy door swung open. My father Richard stood in the doorway. He was wearing an expensive-looking bathrobe he had undoubtedly found in the master closet. His hair was disheveled, his eyes were bloodshot from the night of stolen luxury, and his face was twisted into a scowl of pure entitlement. He looked at the property manager and the officers with a mixture of confusion and irritation, completely unaware of the devastation heading his way. "What is the meaning of this?" my father demanded, his voice thick with sleep and arrogance, carrying perfectly through the camera audio feed. "Do you have any idea what time it is? We are paying a premium for privacy here." Greg stepped forward, his posture rigid. "Good morning. I am Greg, the manager for Aspen Elite Property Management. You are the registered occupants of the Pinecrest Luxury Estate." It was not a question. My father drew himself up, puffing out his chest to intimidate the man standing on the porch. "Yes, we are. My son-in-law rented this property to celebrate a major corporate investment. We have influential guests sleeping inside, and you are creating a disturbance. I suggest you get off my porch before I call your corporate office." Greg did not blink. He calmly raised the clipboard and handed a thick stack of papers directly to my father. "You are not going to call anyone," Sir Greg stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "I am here to execute an immediate eviction protocol due to multiple severe breaches of the rental contract. As of this exact moment, your reservation is permanently canceled." My father stared at the paperwork in his hand, his arrogant scowl faltering slightly. "What are you talking about? We have not breached anything. You cannot evict us. We paid $20,000 for this weekend." Susan appeared in the doorway behind him, clutching a silk blanket. "What is going on, Richard? Who are these people?" Greg looked directly at my mother, his expression devoid of sympathy. "Ma'am, we have comprehensive security footage showing that you hosted an unauthorized event last night with over 40 people. We have documented evidence of severe property damage to the custom outdoor furnishings. Furthermore, we have clear camera footage of illegal substances being consumed on the back deck. You are in violation of clauses 4, 7, and 9 of your legally binding agreement." My father's face turned an alarming shade of crimson. "That is completely ridiculous. You have no proof of any of that. We are a respectable family. We will sue you for harassment." That is when the older police officer took a step forward, resting his hand near his radio. "Sir, the property manager has already provided the department with all necessary video evidence," the officer said. "This is a lawful eviction. You can cooperate with the management company, or you can argue with me, and we can discuss the illegal substances down at the station. Your choice." The threat of police intervention acted like ice water to my father's face. All the bluster vanished in an instant. He looked down at the paperwork in his trembling hands. The top page was the formal eviction notice. The second page was an itemized invoice. Greg pointed a steady finger at the second page. "That is your statement of damages," Greg informed them coldly. "As per the contract you signed, you have incurred a mandatory $30,000 punitive damage fee for the violations and property destruction. We attempted to process this fee to the credit card on file just 20 minutes ago. The card was declined. Therefore, this is now an outstanding legal debt, and you are held personally liable." Susan gasped loudly, her hand flying to her mouth. $30,000! Kevin's investors will never cover that. Kevin, who had just stumbled out of the hallway, froze as he heard the sum. He looked at the police, then at the paperwork, and visibly shrank backward into the shadows of the foyer. Greg did not give them a single second to formulate another excuse. "You have exactly 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings and vacate the premises," Greg commanded, checking his watch. "The officers will remain on site to ensure you do not cause any further damage. If you are not completely off this estate by 6:45, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. Your time starts right now." The front door remained open as panic erupted inside the grand foyer. I watched my parents and my younger sister scramble like terrified rodents. There was no more talk of expensive luxury brands. There was no more boasting about high-level corporate connections. There was only the frantic, undignified scramble to throw their stolen clothes into their expensive rolling suitcases under the watchful eyes of the Aspen Police Department. Brittany ran through the living room, clutching designer makeup tears streaming down her face, screaming at Kevin to do something to fix it. Kevin completely ignored her, shoving his own belongings into a duffel bag, with trembling hands, his facade entirely shattered by the threat of jail time. My mother was weeping openly, struggling to fold the cashmere wrap she had flaunted on the airplane. I sat back in my desk chair in Denver, calmly sipping my freshly brewed morning coffee. I watched the digital timer on my screen count down the minutes. They were being forcefully thrown out into the freezing mountain air, carrying a massive legal debt, and completely stripped of their dignity. The eviction process was executing perfectly, just as I had planned. Through the high-definition camera feed, I watched the absolute destruction of my sister's carefully curated social image. The sweeping driveway of the estate was no longer a glamorous backdrop for her internet lifestyle. It had transformed into a harsh holding area. The strangers who had been partying on my deck just a few hours prior were now corralled near the heavy iron front gates. The Aspen police officers were systematically moving through the crowd of shivering guests. The flashing red and blue lights of the patrol cruisers illuminated their pale faces and ruined designer clothing. They looked miserable as the officers demanded identification and asked pointed questions about the illegal substances found near the stone fire pit. Brittany stood near the large oak front door, her hands trembling violently as she watched her elite friends being subjected to a police interrogation. She clutched an expensive leather handbag against her chest like a protective shield, but it offered no shelter from the magnitude of her public humiliation. This was her worst nightmare, realized in real time. She had built her entire identity around the illusion of being untouchable. Now her wealthy associates were freezing in the mountain air, glaring at her with a mixture of contempt and profound irritation. The social capital she had desperately tried to buy using my stolen emergency funds was evaporating right before her eyes. The guests were angrily muttering to each other, realizing that their hosts were fraudulent tenants being lawfully thrown out. The embarrassment was suffocating her. I could see her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe through a panic attack. She turned sharply away from the driveway and zeroed in on her husband. "Kevin, you have to do something! Right now!" Brittany shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the front porch and translating perfectly through the security microphone. She lunged toward him, grabbing his coat. "You cannot let them do this to us! Look at my friends out there! Look at how they are staring at me! You have to pay this ridiculous fine. Just give the manager his $30,000 and make these police go away." Kevin recoiled from her grasp, his face glistening with cold sweat. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting wildly between the stern property manager, the armed police officers, and his hysterical wife. "Brittany, just calm down for a second," he stammered, raising his hands in a weak, placating gesture. "I cannot just hand over 30 grand in the middle of a driveway at 6 in the morning. The banks are not even open yet." "Do not give me that corporate finance garbage," Brittany screamed, abandoning any pretense of the sophisticated tech wife she loved to play. "You just closed a multi-million-dollar funding round on Thursday. You have been bragging about it all weekend. You told everyone last night that your venture capital firm deposited the first phase of funding into your operational accounts. $30,000 is absolute pocket change for a CEO. Just use your corporate card. Pay the fine so we can go back inside." My father, Richard, suddenly found his voice. "Your sister is right, Kevin." Richard stepped forward, trying to summon his usual commanding presence, though it fell flat in his bathrobe. "This is a massive misunderstanding, but we need to resolve it instantly. Pay the manager, get these cops off the property, and we will sort out the legalities on Monday. We cannot be seen being evicted like common criminals." Kevin swallowed hard. The pressure from both his wife and his father-in-law was immense, and the judgmental stares of his business associates lingering by the police cruisers were destroying his pride. He reached into his coat pocket with a trembling hand. He pulled out a sleek corporate credit card, the physical manifestation of the seed money he had spent 4 years trying to secure. He held it out toward Greg, his hand shaking so violently that the card rattled in his grip. "Fine," Kevin muttered, his voice lacking any of its usual arrogant bravado. "Run the card. Charge the $30,000. But I want an itemized receipt, and my legal team will be contacting your corporate office on Tuesday morning." Greg did not flinch at the empty threat. He pulled a mobile payment terminal from his jacket, his expression completely blank and professional. He took the corporate card from Kevin's trembling hand, inserted the chip into the terminal, and typed in the exact penalty amount. $30,000. He pressed the green confirmation button and turned the screen toward Kevin so he could witness the transaction processing. I sat back in my desk chair in Denver, watching the screen with a profound sense of satisfaction. I knew exactly what that mobile terminal was going to say. I knew it because I had orchestrated the entire sequence of events while they were busy destroying my patio furniture. As a senior financial data auditor, my job requires an intimate knowledge of how venture capital firms operate. I know the rigorous vetting processes they use before handing over millions to unproven startups. More importantly, I know the exact legal structure of the term sheets they force founders to sign. Every legitimate venture capital contract contains a strict morality and ethics clause. Investors absolutely refuse to associate their funds with founders who engage in illegal activities, public scandals, or behaviors that introduce massive liability risks. They demand immediate notification of any civil or criminal proceedings involving company leadership. While Kevin was pouring stolen champagne for his guests and watching them consume illicit substances around my stone fire pit, I was hard at work. I had recognized the names of the executives he had been trying to impress. I knew exactly which venture capital firm had backed his startup. Sometime around 2 in the morning, while my family was still celebrating their perceived victory, I had drafted a highly detailed anonymous email. I addressed it directly to the managing partners of Kevin's investment firm. In that email, I attached the crystal clear security footage of Kevin actively hosting a party where illegal narcotics were present. I included the video of his guests causing thousands of dollars in property damage. I clearly outlined the massive liability nightmare their newly funded CEO was currently creating at an estate in Aspen. The venture capital world never sleeps, especially when their investments are actively going up in flames on a holiday weekend. I knew their crisis management team would flag the email immediately. I knew they would take swift, decisive action to protect their capital before the sun even rose. On the front porch of the Aspen Villa, Greg's mobile terminal emitted a harsh, flat beep. The screen flashed bright red. "Declined," Greg announced, his voice carrying clearly over the crisp mountain air. He handed it back to Kevin. "Your institution has rejected the transaction. You still owe the $30,000 penalty, and you still have exactly 12 minutes to vacate the property before you are arrested." "That is impossible," Kevin gasped, his face draining of all color. He snatched the card back, staring at it as if it had betrayed him. "There is over $1 million in that account." "The funding cleared on Thursday. Run it again. Your machine is broken." "My machine works perfectly fine, sir," Greg stated coldly. "Your card is dead." Kevin frantically reached into his pocket and pulled out his smartphone to check his banking application. The moment he unlocked the screen, I watched his entire body go rigid. His shoulders slumped forward, and his mouth fell open in an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. He was not looking at a simple banking error. He was staring at an urgent, high-priority email that had just landed in his inbox from the board of directors at his venture capital firm. The email informed him that they had received incontrovertible video evidence of his illegal and destructive behavior. It informed him that he had fundamentally breached the strict morality clause of his founding contract. It stated that his operational capital had been frozen immediately, pending a full, aggressive investigation. And most devastatingly, it informed him that he was suspended from his role as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. He had lost his company, his funding, and his future in a single, devastating stroke. "Kevin, what is going on?" Brittany shrieked, grabbing his arm and shaking him violently. "Why did it decline? Fix this right now. We cannot be thrown out onto the street. You promised me this lifestyle." Kevin slowly looked up from his phone, his eyes wide and vacant. He looked at my sister, then at my parents, and finally at the police officers standing on the gravel driveway. The mask of the brilliant, wealthy tech visionary shattered completely, leaving behind a terrified, financially ruined man who was about to be escorted off a mountain by armed guards. He had absolutely nothing left to hide behind. The silence that followed was suffocating. The cold morning breeze swept across the driveway, rustling the heavy pine branches, but nobody moved. Kevin simply stared at his phone, his breathing shallow and rapid. Brittany stepped closer to him, her heels crunching loudly on the gravel. She reached out and grabbed his arm again, her fingernails digging into his expensive winter coat. "Kevin, what does it say?" she demanded, her voice shrill and trembling with rising panic. "Talk to me. Tell me what is happening. Tell me you can fix this." Kevin slowly raised his head. His eyes were completely bloodshot, and the arrogant smirk that usually defined his entire personality was permanently erased. He looked at her as if she were a complete stranger. "Fix this," he whispered, the sound barely escaping his throat. "There is no fixing this, Brittany. It is gone. Everything is completely gone." My father marched forward, his face flushed with a mixture of confusion and mounting rage. "What do you mean it is gone?" Richard barked.
You just secured millions of dollars in venture capital. They cannot just take it away because of a misunderstanding. Call your legal team right now. Tell them to authorize this payment so we can get back inside and handle this mess properly.
Kevin let out a sudden harsh laugh. It was a hollow, cracking sound that made the nearby police officers exchange a wary glance. My legal team, Kevin repeated his voice, growing louder and more frantic. My legal team works for the board of directors, Richard, and the board of directors just fired me. He shoved the phone toward my father, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped the device. Read it yourself. Someone sent them security footage from last night. Someone sent them videos of the party, the damages, and the substances by the fire pit. They saw everything. The email says I have violated the core morality and ethics clause of my founder agreement. They have frozen the operational accounts pending a full federal investigation into the misuse of company resources. I am locked out of the banking portals. I am locked out of my corporate email. I do not have a company anymore. I do not even have a job. My mother gasped, taking a stumbling step backward until she bumped against one of their oversized, expensive suitcases. She pressed her hands to her cheeks, her eyes darting frantically between the stern faces of the police officers and her son-in-law. "But you are the chief executive officer," Susan stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "They cannot just fire the founder. That is your company." "It is their money," Kevin shouted, finally losing the last shred of his composure. "When they write the checks, they make the rules, and they just pulled all the funding. I have absolutely zero access to any capital. The corporate card is dead, my personal accounts are linked to the firm, and they are frozen too. I cannot pay this fine. I cannot pay for a rental car. I cannot even buy a cup of coffee right now." The sheer gravity of his words hit the driveway like a physical shockwave. For years, Kevin had paraded around family gatherings, boasting about his brilliant tech concepts and his imminent rise to billionaire status. He had positioned himself as the savior of their social standing, the wealthy golden boy who would elevate my parents back to the country club lifestyle they believed they deserved. Now standing shivering in the shadow of my Aspen estate, he was nothing more than an unemployed fraud facing a massive corporate investigation. Brittany snatched the phone from my father's hand, her eyes scanning the brutal email from the board of directors. As she read the words terminating her husband's career, her expression morphed from panic into pure, unadulterated rage. She shoved the phone hard into Kevin's chest. "How could you let this happen?" she screamed, her voice echoing sharply down the quiet mountain road. "You told me you had everything under control. You promised me this lifestyle. You said this investment round was completely secure." Kevin swatted her hands away, his own anger finally boiling over. "I did have it under control until you decided we needed to fly to Aspen on a holiday weekend to show off for your pathetic social media followers," he roared back, stepping toward her. "I told you we should have stayed in Denver. I told you I needed to prepare for the board meeting on Tuesday, but no, you demanded a luxury vacation so you could pretend you were better than everyone else. You are the one who invited all those random people over here last night. You are the one who insisted on throwing a party to prove how rich we are."
"I am your wife!"
Brittany shrieked, tears of fury streaming down her face.
"It is your job to provide for me. You are the one who allowed those people to bring illegal things onto the patio. You are the one who popped champagne bottles against the siding. Do not dare put this on me. You are a complete fake, Kevin. You have been playing a pretend CEO for 4 years, and now you have ruined my life."
The ugly, bitter truth they had been hiding behind closed doors was suddenly spilling out for the entire world to see. They were a couple bound together not by love or loyalty, but by mutual delusion and an insatiable greed for status. The moment the money evaporated, their marriage instantly collapsed into vicious, venomous accusations. My father tried to step between them, raising his hands.
"Stop it, both of you! Screaming at each other in the street is not going to solve this. We need to focus. We need to figure out how to pay this property manager and get out of here. Kevin turned his blazing eyes onto my father. There is no figuring this out, Richard. I am ruined. And I am sick and tired of pretending I can afford to support your extravagant taste, too. You and Susan have been leeching off me just as much as Brittany has. You wanted the fancy dinners and the country club prestige without doing any of the actual work. Well, the ride is officially over. My mother let out a loud, dramatic sob, burying her face in her hands as the final vestiges of her perfect family image shattered into sharp, jagged pieces. The illusion of the successful, wealthy golden child and her brilliant tech husband was dead, replaced by the grim reality of two desperate, deceitful people turning on each other the second they faced a real consequence. I sat comfortably in my Denver office, watching the spectacular implosion play out in high definition. I did not feel a single drop of pity. They were finally experiencing the exact kind of emotional and financial devastation they had so casually tried to inflict upon me for my entire life. The senior police officer had clearly seen enough of the domestic dispute. He stepped forward, hooking his thumbs into his utility belt, projecting a calm but immovable authority. "All right, folks, that is enough," the officer said firmly. "You can argue about your corporate finances and your marriage somewhere else. Your 30 minutes are up. You have been formally evicted from this property, and the management company has issued your fine. You need to take your luggage and walk down to the main road immediately. If you step back onto this driveway, I will arrest you for trespassing." My father looked at the officer, his shoulders sagging in complete defeat. "Officer, please," he begged, his arrogant tone entirely gone, replaced by the pathetic whine of a broken man. "My wife is freezing. We do not have a car. We do not have a way to get back to town. Can you at least call us a cab or give us a ride to a hotel?" The officer shook his head. "We are not a taxi service, sir. There is a public bus stop about 1.5 miles down the mountain road. I suggest you start walking." Greg, the property manager, stepped back and motioned toward the heavy iron gates. "Please exit the premises immediately." Without any other option, my family slowly turned toward their pile of expensive, heavy rolling suitcases. The reality of their situation was physically crushing. They had to drag their massive bags across the rough gravel and down a steep, winding mountain road in the freezing early morning air. Susan picked up her designer travel bag, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the leather handle. She was weeping silently, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, messy streaks. Brittany was still glaring at Kevin, who refused to even look at her as he hoisted his duffel bag over his shoulder and began walking toward the exit without waiting for the rest of them. I watched through the security camera as the four of them trudged slowly past the iron gates, looking like refugees from a failed high society experiment. The gates swung shut behind them with a heavy metallic clang, physically sealing them out of my world. They were entirely stranded in one of the most expensive and unforgiving environments in the country. They could not rent a car. They could not book a hotel room. They could not even buy a warm cup of coffee to fend off the biting cold. Without the stolen funds from my emergency medical credit card, and without the frozen capital from Kevin's imploded startup, they were officially empty-handed in the snowy mountains of Aspen. The mountain road leading away from the Pinecrest estate was steep, winding, and completely unforgiving. Aspen sits at an elevation of nearly 8,000 feet, and the early morning air was thin, biting, and intensely cold. I watched through the perimeter cameras as my family began their humiliating descent. Brittany was still wearing the impractical designer boots she had packed for exclusive restaurant dinners, and her high heels catching and twisting in the rough gravel lining the edge of the asphalt. Every few steps, she would stumble, her ankles giving out under the weight of her oversized luggage. Susan had wrapped her expensive cashmere travel shawl tightly around her shoulders, but the thin, luxurious fabric offered absolutely no protection against the biting alpine wind.
Richard, a man who prided himself on projecting strength and authority, was red-faced and panting heavily within the first 10 minutes. He dragged two massive hard-shell suitcases behind him, the small plastic wheels scraping loudly and pathetically against the pavement. Those wheels were designed to glide effortlessly over the polished marble floors of international airports and luxury hotel lobbies, not the rugged, icy terrain of a mountain pass. I watched a sleek black luxury SUV drive past them, heading up toward the estates. The driver slowed down, likely staring at the bizarre spectacle of four people dressed in high-end clothing, dragging enormous suitcases down the side of a mountain highway, like lost, displaced stragglers. My parents kept their heads down, their previous arrogance entirely replaced by the crushing weight of public embarrassment. Back in the warm, quiet comfort of my Denver office, I picked up my phone. I knew exactly what was about to happen. Right on cue, the screen lit up with an incoming call from my mother. She had undoubtedly reached the limits of her physical endurance and had reverted to her default survival strategy. She was trying to call the dark cloud to fix her mess. She probably intended to scream at me first, demand that I unblock the credit card, and order me to send a private car to pick them up from the side of the road. I stared at her glowing contact photo for a long moment, reflecting on the decades I had spent answering those frantic, demanding calls. I had always picked up the phone. I had always rushed to solve their problems, absorbing their insults while quietly paying their bills. I did not decline the call. I simply opened her contact profile, scrolled to the very bottom of the screen, and tapped the block caller button. I repeated the exact same process for my father, my sister, and my brother-in-law. A profound, beautiful sense of peace washed over me as the digital barriers slammed shut. Hundreds of miles away, standing on the side of a freezing road, my mother stared at her phone in absolute disbelief. I could not hear her voice, but I knew the exact automated message she was receiving. She likely tried dialing again, her manicured fingers tapping the cold screen with increasing desperation. When the call failed a second time, she turned to Richard, waving the phone in his face. Her mouth moved rapidly, and her expression contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. She was finally realizing that her safety net was completely gone. I was no longer on the other end of the line, waiting to absorb her abuse. She was entirely on her own. The walk to the public transit stop took them over 2 exhausting hours. It was a grueling, miserable trek that completely stripped away the last remaining shreds of their wealthy facade. By the time they reached the small, covered bus shelter situated near the main highway, they looked entirely defeated. Kevin had dropped his heavy duffel bag onto the muddy shoulder of the road, leaning over with his hands on his knees, gasping for breath in the thin mountain air. Brittany was sobbing openly, her expensive makeup smeared across her cheeks in dark streaks, complaining loudly about the painful blisters forming on her feet. There was no more screaming. There were no more vicious arguments about corporate funds or venture capital firms. They simply did not have the physical or emotional energy left to fight with each other. The crushing reality of their situation had finally smothered their enormous egos. They were stranded, freezing, and entirely out of options. They huddled together under the small metal roof of the transit shelter, shivering as cars sped past them on the highway, ignoring them completely. The local commuter bus eventually dropped them off at a larger regional transit center later that morning. I tracked their desperate movements through the banking application, watching as Kevin attempted to use his frozen corporate card at an automated ticketing kiosk. The transaction for 4 long-distance bus tickets to Denver was immediately declined. A few minutes later, an attempt to use my mother's personal maxed-out credit card met the exact same humiliating fate. I could vividly picture the scene unfolding inside that bleak, fluorescent-lit transit station. My father, who had spent the entire weekend boasting about his elite status to anyone who would listen, was now being forced to empty his pockets. They had to gather every single piece of physical currency they had managed to bring with them. I imagined my mother frantically digging through her designer handbag, pushing aside expensive cosmetics to search for crumpled bills hidden in the lining. I pictured Brittany dumping the contents of her purse onto a hard plastic waiting room chair, counting out loose quarters, dimes, and dollar bills. They pooled their meager cash together, standing at the ticket counter like beggars, pleading for a discount. For people who prided themselves on swiping heavy metal credit cards without looking at the price, the act of counting loose change in a public bus terminal must have felt like absolute torture. They barely had enough physical money to purchase 4 tickets for the absolute cheapest, lowest-tier commercial bus service back to Denver. There would be no expansive first-class legroom on this journey. There would be no complimentary champagne served in crystal flutes, and there would certainly be no fawning flight attendants catering to their every demand. There would only be cramped, uncomfortable, fabric-covered seats on a crowded public bus that made dozens of tedious stops along the winding, treacherous mountain routes. The air would smell of diesel fumes and stale fast food. The ride would be agonizingly slow, bumping along the highway for hours on end. As the sun began to set, casting long, dark shadows across the mountains, they boarded that bus. The bright, glittering illusion of their Aspen vacation was officially over, replaced by the grim, uncomfortable reality of a long journey home in coach. They were going to sit in complete silence for the next 18 hours, shoulder to shoulder, with strangers staring out the window into the pitch-black night. They had absolutely nothing to do but reflect on the spectacular ruins of their own arrogance. And waiting for them at the end of that miserable, exhausting ride was a house they no longer had any right to enter. The bus had barely cleared the regional terminal before the silence between them fractured. I learned that later because blocking their personal numbers did not stop them from borrowing other people's phones. Within the first hour, 3 calls reached me from unfamiliar Colorado numbers. I did not answer any of them, but each caller left a voicemail long enough to capture the argument raging behind them. The first message began with my mother's voice, breathless and indignant. "Whitney, this is your mother. A kind passenger is letting me use her phone. You need to call back immediately and arrange a car to meet us at the next stop. Your father is not feeling well, Brittany's feet are injured, and this bus is completely unacceptable." Behind her, my father shouted that none of them would be on the bus if Susan had not spent 30 years indulging Brittany's every demand. "Do not start blaming me." Susan snapped away from the borrowed phone. "You were the one telling everyone Kevin was a genius. You were the one bragging about his investors at the country club." The recording ended with the passenger asking for her phone back. I saved the voicemail without responding. The commercial bus climbed through the mountain pass in slow, grinding turns. Its narrow aisle was crowded with bags, and every stop sent cold air through the cabin. There was nowhere to storm off to, nowhere to hide, and no private car waiting to carry one offended person away from the others. Richard blamed Susan first. He accused her of turning Brittany into an adult who believed every desire was an emergency. He listed the designer clothes, the elaborate birthday dinners, the wedding they could not afford, and the years of rescuing her from overdrafted accounts. According to the second voicemail, Susan fired back that Richard had encouraged every bit of it because Brittany's glamorous image made him feel successful. "At least she gave us something to be proud of," Richard said. The sentence created a silence so sharp that even the stranger holding the phone stopped breathing. Then Brittany exploded. "Something to be proud of," she repeated. "You told me Kevin had money. You told me his company was about to make us rich. You pushed me to marry him because you wanted to tell your friends your daughter was married to a technology founder." Kevin's voice cut across hers. "Do not rewrite history. You were shopping for penthouses before the company had a product. You treated every investor conversation like a personal shopping allowance. You invited 40 people to that house because you needed photographs for social media. You told me to invite them, Brittany shouted. You said impressing people was part of fundraising. I said invite 6 decision makers to dinner. You invited everyone who had ever ignored you at a charity event. The borrowed phone shifted, producing a scrape of fabric and a muffled apology from the passenger. Then my mother's voice returned, pleading directly into the receiver. Whitney, please. Whatever happened, we can resolve it privately. Call me before your father causes a scene and gets us thrown off this bus too. The message ended. I listened to it twice, not because I felt tempted to rescue them, but because the pattern had finally become impossible to ignore. Even while asking for help, my mother refused to admit that she had stolen from me. The emergency was never my pain, my money, or my trust. The emergency was always the moment their choices became uncomfortable. Several hours later, a third, unfamiliar number appeared. A man quietly explained that 4 passengers near the back were having a serious domestic argument. His introduction lasted only seconds. The remaining voicemail captured the collapse of Brittany and Kevin's marriage in full. I am done, Kevin said. The moment we reach Denver, I am finding somewhere else to stay. You do not have anywhere else, Brittany replied. Your accounts are frozen. Your board fired you. Without me and my family, you are nobody. Without your family, I would still have a company, Kevin shot back. Your mother stole the card. You demanded the estate. Your friends brought drugs. Every disaster this weekend began because all 3 of you needed to look rich. Richard ordered him not to speak to Brittany that way. Kevin laughed bitterly. You cannot order anyone anymore. You do not own a home. You do not have savings. You spent 3 years living in Whitney's house while telling people she lived with you. The only competent person in this family is the one you left behind. That statement triggered chaos. Richard called Kevin an ungrateful fraud. Susan accused him of deceiving Brittany about the funding. Brittany demanded that Kevin transfer whatever personal money he had left into her account before the bank froze it. Kevin told her there was no money, then said the word divorce clearly enough that every passenger nearby must have heard it. Brittany repeated the word in disbelief. Divorce. Yes, Kevin said. Divorce. I would rather rebuild from nothing than spend another year financing your performance. You cannot leave me when this is your fault. Watch me. The echo of my own words to my mother was unmistakable, though Kevin could not have known I had used them. I stopped the voicemail and deleted nothing. Their arguments were no longer weapons capable of pulling me back into the family system. They were simply the sound of people discovering that loyalty based on money disappears the moment the money does. By midnight, exhaustion replaced shouting. The bus descended from the high mountains, stopping in small towns where fluorescent station lights poured across the windows. Richard sat rigidly with his arms crossed, refusing to look at Susan. Susan quietly cried into the cashmere wrap purchased with my card. Brittany scrolled through her phone, deleting photographs from the trip and watching her social media story expire without the triumphant ending she had imagined. Kevin moved to an empty seat several rows away and stared into the darkness. At one rest stop, my mother apparently tried one final strategy. She asked the driver whether the company could charge 4 hotel rooms to the ticket reservation and let them repay the balance later. The driver told her the bus company did not provide credit lodging or emergency loans. They had 15 minutes to use the restroom and buy food before departure. They could not afford food. The few dollars remaining after the tickets purchased 1 bottle of water and 2 packets of crackers. Richard wanted the water because he felt dizzy. Brittany demanded it because she had been crying. Susan divided it into 4 paper cups, measuring each portion with the anxious precision she had mocked whenever I created a household budget. That image stayed with me. For years, they had called planning joyless and restraint cruel. Now they were dividing a bottle of water under terminal lights because they had treated every boundary as an obstacle to be cheated. Near dawn, the bus finally turned toward Denver. No one apologized. No one accepted responsibility. Their family unity had not survived one weekend without my money cushioning every conflict. They arrived not as a close family, returning from a glamorous holiday, but as four exhausted people connected only by resentment, blame, and the urgent need for somewhere to sleep. They still believed my house would provide that shelter. They had no idea what was waiting on the porch. Tuesday morning grayish light filtered through the smeared windows of the commercial bus pulling into the Denver Transit Center. The agonizing 18-hour journey finally came to a merciful halt. I was not there to see them disembark, but I perfectly visualized the scene. My family stripped of their artificial glamour, stepping off the bus with stiff joints and hollow eyes. They spent the night huddled in uncomfortable seats, listening to the rattling engine. The bitter arguments that erupted on the mountain road had burned out, leaving only a toxic silence. They were exhausted and entirely defeated. They pooled their meager change to secure a ride on a local bus, heading to the quiet suburban neighborhood they called home. As they trudged the final few blocks from the bus stop, the familiar sights of the neighborhood must have felt like a cruel taunt. The manicured lawns and pristine driveways represented a lifestyle they almost entirely lost. For 3 years, my parents paraded around that neighborhood acting like monarchs of the cul-de-sac. They hosted barbecues, boasted about my father's fictional consulting business, and treated the property as their personal kingdom. They completely rewrote history to suit their enormous egos. If anyone asked Richard and Susan were simply allowing their hard-working daughter to live with them while she saved up for her own place, the reality was the exact opposite. The sprawling 4-bedroom house did not belong to them. It belonged entirely to me. 3 years ago, when my father's reckless decisions culminated in a financial collapse, the bank was days away from foreclosing on their home. They had nowhere to go and no credit. I stepped in, using my pristine financial record and savings to secure the mortgage on a beautiful new property. I moved them in, graciously giving them the expansive master bedroom, while I confined myself to the cramped guest room upstairs. I wanted to preserve their dignity and protect them from humiliation. In return, they systematically took over every square inch, treating me like an unwanted tenant in the sanctuary I provided. Now, as they dragged their heavy suitcases up the long concrete driveway, they were expecting to walk right back into that comfortable illusion. They expected to find me sitting at the kitchen island, ready to be screamed at and blamed for their ruined vacation. They planned to march through the front door, drop their bags in the foyer, and immediately demand breakfast. But as they approached the porch, the illusion abruptly and violently shattered. The covered porch of my home was usually decorated with potted plants and a welcome mat. Today, the space was occupied by something entirely different. Stacked neatly across the wooden floorboards were dozens of heavy brown cardboard moving boxes. The boxes were taped securely shut, arranged in a massive wall blocking the large bay window. Resting on top were winter coats wrapped in plastic garment bags, alongside a collection of expensive designer shoes carelessly tossed into trash bags. My father stopped dead in his tracks at the base of the steps. His bloodshot eyes widened as he stared at the towering stack of cardboard. My mother bumped into his shoulder, too exhausted to pay attention to where she walked, before she also froze. Brittany and Kevin staggered up behind them, completely failing to comprehend the scene. "What on earth is all this garbage doing on the porch?" my mother complained, her voice weak from the miserable bus ride. She dropped the handle of her travel bag. "Did Whitney order new furniture? Tell her to come out here and move this mess immediately so we can get inside. I am absolutely freezing and I need a hot shower." My father did not answer. He was staring intensely at the writing on the side of the closest cardboard box. I used a thick permanent marker to label each carton. The bold letters spelled out the contents with clinical precision. Richard, winter clothing. Susan, bathroom vanity. Brittany, stored belongings. A deep, primal panic began to wash over my father's face. He dropped his suitcases and scrambled up the wooden steps, pushing past the boxes to reach the heavy oak front door. He reached into his coat pocket, his hands trembling violently, and pulled out his metal keyring. He found the familiar brass key that he used every day for the past 3 years. He jammed the key into the deadbolt and tried to turn it. The mechanism did not yield. The key slid into the slot, but it refused to rotate. The internal pins were completely different. My father grunted in frustration, pulling the key out and shoving it back with more force. He twisted his wrist, gritting his teeth, trying to force the lock open. It did not budge a single millimeter. He pulled the key out again, staring at the jagged metal edges as if the object suddenly betrayed him. He looked at the door handle, then up at the deadbolt. The brushed nickel hardware looked exactly the same as it had when he left on Wednesday afternoon. I intentionally hired a premium locksmith to replace the internal cylinders, while keeping the exterior housing identical, just to maximize the psychological impact of this exact moment. "The lock is broken," my father stammered, his voice rising in panic as he rattled the brass door handle.
Whitney, open this door right now! The lock is completely jammed!
He pounded his fist against the solid oak wood. The heavy thud echoed loudly through the quiet suburban neighborhood. He pounded again, the desperation in his movements becoming frantic and unhinged.
Whitney, open the door! We are standing out here!
My mother slowly walked up the steps, her eyes scanning the black marker labels on the cardboard boxes. She touched a plastic garment bag, recognizing her own expensive winter coats sealed inside. She looked at the trash bags filled with shoes. The reality of the situation crashed into her with the force of a freight train. She let out a sharp gasp, pressing both hands against her mouth. "Richard," she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute terror. "Richard, the lock is not broken. Those are our things. She packed our things." My father stopped pounding on the door. He turned around, his chest heaving, his face drained of all color. He looked at the massive wall of boxes, then down at his wife, and finally at Brittany and Kevin, who were standing on the driveway in stunned silence. The arrogant patriarch of the family was suddenly looking at his entire life boxed up and discarded on a concrete porch. They were not just locked out of the house. They were locked out of my life. I spent Monday methodically clearing out every item they owned from the master bedroom and guest spaces. I packed their expensive clothing, useless gadgets, and hoarded luxury items with the detached efficiency of a warehouse worker. I carried every box to the porch myself, securing the perimeter and ensuring my sanctuary was finally cleansed of their toxic presence. I was sitting quietly in my home office on the second floor, looking out through the partially open blinds. I watched them standing on the porch, surrounded by their cardboard ruins, now completely exposed to the harsh reality of their actions. The safety net they had abused for so long was officially gone, and I felt nothing but an overwhelming sense of profound, well-deserved peace as I prepared to face them. I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk to retrieve my phone. The screen was completely illuminated, cluttered with a staggering wall of frantic notifications. The digital counter displayed exactly 77 missed calls. The vast majority of them were from my mother, interspersed with a handful of desperate attempts from my father. There were also dozens of text messages, shifting wildly in tone from demanding anger to pathetic crying pleas. I did not bother reading a single one of them. The sheer volume of their panic was all the information I needed. The heavy dark clouds that had been gathering over Denver all afternoon finally broke, unleashing a cold, relentless downpour.
I could hear the rain lashing against the roof and streaking down the glass panes of my office window. The timing of the weather could not have been more perfectly aligned with the reality of their situation. I walked over to the full-length mirror resting in the corner of my office. I was not going to face them in casual lounge clothes. I was about to conduct the most important professional termination of my entire life, and I intended to look the part. I was wearing a sharp, meticulously tailored charcoal gray business suit, paired with a crisp white blouse and simple, elegant silver jewelry. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, flawless style. I looked like the senior financial data auditor I was projecting absolute, immovable authority. I took one final grounding breath, smoothing the lapels of my jacket, and walked out of the office. My heels clicked with a steady, measured rhythm against the hardwood floors of the hallway as I descended the staircase. The pounding on the heavy oak front door had stopped, replaced by the muffled, miserable sounds of arguing and the relentless drumming of the rain. I reached the foyer and paused, placing my hand flat against the cold wood of the door. I disabled the deadbolt with a sharp, decisive click. I turned the brass handle and pulled the heavy door inward, opening it wide to reveal the absolute devastation waiting on my porch. The scene before me was almost difficult to comprehend. The family that had boarded a first-class flight to Aspen just a few days ago, draped in designer cashmere and arrogant smiles, was completely gone. In their place stood four thoroughly soaked, shivering, and pathetic individuals, huddled defensively behind a fortress of cardboard boxes. The blowing rain had completely drenched them during their miserable walk from the bus stop. My mother's carefully styled hair was plastered to her skull in wet, stringy strands. Her expensive makeup was entirely washed away, leaving her face looking pale, aged, and drawn. My father was hunched over his broad shoulders, trembling beneath a soaked winter coat that offered absolutely no warmth. Brittany and Kevin stood slightly behind them, looking like frightened, reprimanded children. They were entirely stripped of their illusions. For a long moment, nobody moved. They simply stared at me, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock, exhaustion, and profound confusion. They looked at my immaculate business suit, then down at their own ruined, soaking wet clothing. The contrast between my absolute control and their complete physical and emotional ruin was stark and undeniable. "Whitney!" My mother gasped, her voice cracking as a fresh wave of tears spilled down her rain-slicked cheeks. "Thank God you are here. The lock is broken. We could not get inside. Please, let us in right now. We are absolutely freezing out here." I stood perfectly still in the warm, dry threshold of my home, blocking the entrance completely. "The lock is not broken, Mom," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the sound of the falling rain. "The lock works exactly as it was designed to. It just does not accept your key anymore." My mother let out a loud, wretched sob, stepping forward and reaching a trembling hand out toward my arm. "Whitney, please," she begged, her voice pitching upward into a frantic, desperate whine. "We are family. We are your parents. You cannot possibly do this to us. You cannot just leave us standing out here in the freezing rain." I looked down at her outstretched hand and took a very deliberate, calculated step backward, ensuring she could not touch me. "Family," I repeated, rolling the word around in my mouth as if tasting something incredibly bitter. "Family does not secretly go on an extravagant vacation using their daughter's emergency medical credit card. Family does not post laughing videos on the internet, publicly humiliating her and calling her a dark cloud." My father stepped in front of my mother, trying to summon the booming, authoritarian voice he always relied upon to force my compliance. "Now you listen to me, Whitney," he demanded, pointing a shaking, rain-slicked finger at my face. "You have made your point. You canceled the card and you ruined the trip, fine, but this is our home too. You are going to step aside, let us bring these boxes back inside, and we are going to sit down and figure this out like adults.
You do not treat your father this way. I tilted my head, studying him with cold, clinical precision. You lost the right to demand my respect the second you decided my financial stability was nothing more than a personal funding source for your delusions, I replied smoothly. And to clarify your earlier statement, this is absolutely not your home. It never was. I hold the deed, I pay the mortgage, I pay the property taxes. I simply allowed you to occupy my space because I felt sorry for you when you bankrupted yourselves 3 years ago. I thought I was helping my parents get back on their feet. Instead, I invited a family of parasites into my sanctuary. Brittany pushed her way forward, her teeth literally chattering from the cold. Whitney, please, Brittany cried. Her usual arrogance entirely evaporated. Kevin lost his company. They fired him. We have absolutely nothing left. We cannot even afford to rent a hotel room tonight. That sounds like a personal financial crisis, Brittany, I stated, showing absolutely zero sympathy for her sudden downfall. I highly suggest you draft a practical budget and look into affordable housing options. I hear that is what boring salaried workers do when they need to survive in the real business world. Kevin flinched as I threw his own previous insults right back in his face. He kept his eyes glued to the wet porch floorboards, completely unwilling to make eye contact with the woman he had spent years mocking. He knew he had absolutely no leverage, no money, and no authority left to wield. You are a monster! My mother shrieked, wrapping her arms tightly around herself as the wind whipped across the porch. How can you be so incredibly cold? We gave you life. We raised you. We loved you. You loved what I could provide for you. I corrected her immediately. You loved my credit score. You loved having a designated scapegoat to blame whenever your own poor decisions caught up with you. But you never actually loved me. If you did, you would not have drained my safety net to buy champagne. My father took a heavy, aggressive step toward the threshold, clearly intending to physically push past me into the foyer. I raised my hand, stopping him completely dead in his tracks. You want to come inside this house? I asked, reaching into my tailored suit jacket. I pulled out a thick, audited financial folder and slammed it hard onto the nearest cardboard box. Fine, but first, you are going to explain why my college savings account was secretly drained to pay for Brittany's wedding. The rain poured heavily against the wooden railing of the porch, creating a steady drumming rhythm that filled the tense silence. My mother stared at me, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. My father lowered his hand, his aggressive posture collapsing as the sheer weight of my accusation settled over him. I did not wait for them to formulate a lie. I reached into the interior pocket of my tailored jacket and pulled out a second, tightly bound financial dossier. I tossed it onto the nearest cardboard box. The heavy thud it made, landing on the damp cardboard, sounded incredibly final. That folder contains every bank statement, withdrawal slip, and forged signature associated with the educational trust fund my grandparents established for me, I explained, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. When I was 18 years old, you sat me down in our old living room and told me the account had been wiped out by a market crash. You looked me right in the eyes and told me I simply was not smart enough or talented enough to earn a full academic scholarship. You convinced me that my only option was to take out massive, high-interest student loans and figure it out by myself. My mother took a small, shaky step backward, bumping into Brittany. Her eyes darted away from mine, unable to maintain contact. I spent the entirety of my 20s working 3 different jobs just to keep my head above water. I continued letting the cold reality of my words strike them one by one. I skipped meals. I lived in terrible, unsafe apartments. I sacrificed every single ounce of my youth, believing I was a financial burden who just had to work harder to survive. Meanwhile, According to the certified bank records in that folder, you were actively draining my trust fund. You forged my signature to authorize early withdrawals. You took the first $30,000 to buy Brittany a brand new luxury car for her high school graduation. Then a few years later, you quietly liquidated the remaining balance to pay for her extravagant, over-the-top wedding. My father looked physically ill. The color completely drained from his face as he stared at the folder. Whitney stammered, his booming voice reduced to a pathetic, rattling whisper. We always intended to pay that money back. We were just waiting for my investments to mature. You have to understand the immense social pressure we were facing back then. Brittany needed to make a strong impression to attract the right kind of social circle. You were always so independent and practical. We knew you would figure out a way to succeed on your own. You stole my future to buy her a car and a party I stated completely immune to his pathetic attempts at justification. You made me suffer so she could pretend to be wealthy. And the absolute worst part is that you spent the last 15 years calling me a failure while you were actively spending the money that was supposed to secure my education. Kevin turned slowly to look at Brittany, his expression contorting into pure, unfiltered disgust. His own financial ruin was still fresh, but discovering that his wife's entire wealthy background was built on a stolen college fund was clearly the breaking point. You told me your parents were independently wealthy, Kevin hissed at her, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. You told me you came from a high society family. You are nothing but a family of common thieves. Do not you dare speak to me like that, Brittany! Shrieked tears of humiliation, mixing with the rain on her face. I did not know they stole the money from her. I thought they were just rich. I did not care if Brittany knew about the theft or not. The internal collapse of their fraudulent dynamic was no longer my concern. I reached into the heavy folder resting on the box and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on crisp, water-resistant paper. I held them out toward my father, forcing him to take them from my hand. These are your final documents, I informed them, my voice cutting through the sound of their bickering. The first document is a formal, legally binding eviction notice, because you have never paid a single cent of rent or contributed to the mortgage of this property. You have absolutely no tenant rights in the state of Colorado. You are legally classified as hostile guests. The second document is an active court-approved restraining order. It covers me, my property, my financial assets, and my place of employment. It explicitly forbids any of you from contacting me through phone, email, social media, or third parties. My mother let out a loud, dramatic wail, burying her face in her hands. You are throwing your own parents out onto the street in a rainstorm? You are a heartless, cruel person. We have absolutely nowhere to go. We have no money. You should have thought about your housing security before you stole my money to fly first class to Aspen, I replied smoothly, crossing my arms over my chest. Your personal belongings have been packed with far more care than you ever showed me. You have exactly 10 minutes to pick up these boxes and carry them off my property line. If you are not completely clear of this driveway when that timer expires, I will make one phone call to the local police department. I will have you arrested for criminal trespassing, and I will hand these audited financial files directly to the district attorney to press formal felony fraud charges for the theft of my trust fund. My father looked at the legal papers in his hand, his entire body trembling with the realization that he was completely defeated. He had no leverage, no money, and no authority left to wield. He slowly lowered his head, staring at the wet concrete beneath his ruined leather shoes. The fight had completely drained out of him. He turned to my mother and nodded, once a sharp, jerky movement signaling their total surrender. Without uttering another word of protest, my father bent down and picked up the first cardboard box. The rain was steadily soaking through the cheap brown material, threatening to tear the seams apart. He hoisted it into his arms and began the humiliating walk down the driveway toward the curb. My mother let out a final, pathetic wail, but the sound was swallowed by the storm. She looked at me, hoping for a last-second reprieve, but my expression remained carved from stone. Realizing she had absolutely no other option, she stepped out from under the protection of the porch overhang. She grabbed a plastic garbage bag filled with her designer shoes. Her shoulders hunched against the biting wind. Kevin did not help them. He did not even look at his wife. He adjusted the strap of his duffel bag over his shoulder and walked straight past the wall of boxes. "Where are you going?" Brittany cried out, lunging forward to grab his sleeve. "We have to figure out a plan. We have to find a place to stay." Kevin violently yanked his arm out of her grasp. "There is no we anymore, Brittany," he stated, his voice completely devoid of any affection. "I am going to a friend's house to figure out how to salvage my life. You and your thieving family can figure out your own mess." He turned his back on her and marched down the sidewalk, disappearing into the gray, rainy afternoon, without looking back a single time. Brittany stood frozen on the steps, the rain plastering her hair to her cheeks, entirely stripped of her glamorous facade. The wealthy, untouchable socialite she loved to portray on the internet was dead, leaving behind only a soaked, miserable woman who had just lost her husband, her stolen wealth, and her dignity in a matter of minutes. With shaking hands, she bent down and picked up one of her own heavy boxes, joining my parents in their pathetic march to the curb. I stood in the doorway and watched them struggle. They had to call a budget transportation van pooling the last of their loose change to afford the ride to a cheap, run-down motel on the outskirts of the city. I watched as they hastily shoved their soggy boxes into the back of the rusted van, their movements frantic and thoroughly humiliated. They were shivering, defeated, and completely broken by the weight of their own greed. The van doors slammed shut, and the vehicle sputtered down the street, splashing through deep puddles until it turned the corner and vanished from my sight. I stepped back into my quiet, warm foyer and firmly pulled the heavy oak door shut. I reached out and engaged the brand-new deadbolt. The loud metallic click of the lock sliding into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. It was the sound of absolute, irrevocable closure. I walked into the kitchen, my heels clicking softly against the pristine hardwood floor. The house was entirely silent, but for the first time in 34 long years, the silence did not feel heavy or oppressive to me anymore. It did not feel like loneliness. It felt like expansive, limitless freedom. The air was clean, completely purged of their toxic complaints, their constant demands, and their suffocating expectations. I was finally the sole occupant of my own peaceful sanctuary. I walked over to the sleek espresso maker and began carefully preparing a fresh, steaming cup. I took my absolute time, deeply enjoying the simple, beautifully uninterrupted rhythm of the daily task. The rich, intensely dark aroma of freshly roasted coffee beans slowly filled the kitchen, providing a sharp, incredibly pleasant contrast to the gloomy, violent storm still raging wildly outside the large glass windows. I poured the hot coffee into my favorite white ceramic mug, gently wrapping both of my hands tightly around the comforting, warm surface, and slowly walked back upstairs to the absolute sanctuary of my home office. I sat down at my heavy wooden desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed brightly, illuminating the quiet room. I bypassed my security applications and logged directly into my primary investment portfolios. I watched the numbers populate on the screen, a cascading sea of green data points. My assets were secure. My real estate holdings were actively generating revenue, and my financial future was completely, undeniably bulletproof. I had built an empire through pure discipline and relentless hard work, and nobody was ever going to steal the fruits of my labor again. I took a slow sip of my coffee, looking around the peaceful, immaculate room. My parents had spent my entire life trying to convince me that I was a failure. They had constantly reminded me that I was just a boring, unlovable dark cloud who existed solely to facilitate their happiness. They had stolen my college fund, hijacked my credit, and attempted to claim my success as their own. But they had failed. They had vastly underestimated the very strength they forced me to develop in order to survive them. When my family told me to stay home for Labor Day weekend so they could have the best trip ever, they were not lying. They were actually telling the absolute truth. It truly was the best trip ever. But it was the best trip for me. Because when they boarded that first-class flight and left me behind in an empty house, they also left behind the heavy, suffocating shackles they had used to bind me for my entire life. They flew away looking for a temporary luxury vacation, and they inadvertently handed me the permanent, ultimate gift of total liberation. I was finally free. The hardest truth I had to learn was that shared DNA does not obligate you to endure endless disrespect. For years, I tried to buy my family love by being the responsible one, hoping that eventually my sacrifices would earn their appreciation. Instead, my reliability only funded their arrogance. But watching them exploit my emergency funds gave me the greatest gift of all, which is complete clarity. I realized that my worth was never tied to their validation. The moment I stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own actions, I was finally able to protect myself. If there is someone in your life who only sees you as a safety net while constantly treating you like a burden, you owe it to yourself to cut the cord. Walking away from toxic family members is not an act of cruelty. It is a necessary act of self-preservation. You do not have to set yourself on fire just to keep other people warm. Let them face the cold reality of their own choices, while you build a life that actually brings you peace. Please share your experiences in the comments below if you have ever had to draw a hard line and cut toxic family members out of your life. Let me know how you found the courage to walk away. If my journey to financial and emotional freedom resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this story with anyone who might need a reminder that their peace is worth protecting. Thank you so much for listening, and remember that sometimes the best trip you can ever take is the one where you finally leave your abusers behind.